Chapter 2481. McCarthy Manor occupied a large area. It was like a small, independent city, separated from the outside world. Meg listened to Bosan's introduction while sizing up the luxurious manor, verifying it with the information and map in his mind. He felt 3 terrifying auras in the depths of the manor, which was the core of the entire manor. 3 transcendents were guarding the manor, and these were not all the transcendents in the McCarthy family. Such a background was truly shocking. The entry process of a large family was quite cumbersome. Even though he was personally brought back by Nancy, he still had to go through multiple checks before finally receiving his work pass. Even with the work pass, as a chef, his activity area in the manor was still limited. So-called specially hired chefs, other than the title and salary, were no different from maids in the eyes of the plutocrats. Congratulations! You've officially become a member of the McCarthy Manor. This will be the most glorious day of your life. Bosan looked at Mag, who had come out with his badge, with a gratified expression. Even working a shift is brainwashing. Meg complained in his heart. Even in the underground city, his most glorious day should have been when he won first place in the Chef King competition with a full score. After exchanging a few pleasantries with Bosan, Meg excused himself and wanted to rest in the dormitory. Bosan brought Meg to the chef's dormitory. As a specially hired chef, Meg could get a separate suite. But before he reached the dormitory, he saw a young girl in a JK uniform sitting on the low wall in front of the villa. Her pair of slender legs dangled, swaying, and glistening. Oh no! Bosan's expression changed slightly. Meg glanced at the young girl. She was about 15 or 16 years old. This could be inferred from her ordinary figure, similar to Barbara's. But when he saw her face, Meg squinted his eyes. This young girl looked similar to Nancy, but compared to Nancy's cold and noble appearance, she had a pair of peach blossom eyes. As if hearing footsteps, the young girl suddenly turned her head and fixed her gaze on Meg's face, revealing a playful smile. Norma McCarthy. Meg recognized the young girl's identity at a glance. But why was she in the chef's dormitory? Were you waiting for me? Meg pretended to be confused and continued to walk forward half a step behind Bosan. Miss Norma, you're here. Bosan humbly stepped forward to greet her. He lowered his head, not daring to look at the pair of slender white legs. Are you Hades? The girl sitting on the low wall ignored Bosan and asked Meg. Meg did not have the habit of lowering his head in front of women, so he looked straight at that pair of white and slender legs. Her skin was white and shiny, delicate and smooth. With such good legs, it would be a pity not to ride a tricycle. Yes. Meg nodded and continued to stare. As long as I don't feel awkward, others will feel awkward. Norma was used to servants lowering their heads in front of her. She did not expect this fellow to stare at her like 2 scorching lights, causing her to unnaturally close her legs as a hint of red rose on her face. However, this guy was even better looking in person. He had a high nose bridge and exquisite facial features. Especially those brown eyes, they were deep and tranquil. He was clearly staring at her, but it didn't seem obscene. Instead, it seemed like he was admiring her, clean and pure. For some reason, her momentum weakened. She coughed softly and said, "Do you know that the snake liver you used in the competition was mine?" Meg pondered for a moment and said seriously, "I won't tell anyone that you are Medusa." Norma was stunned for a while before she came back to her senses. She was so angry that she laughed. Was this guy doing it on purpose, or was he serious? Miss Norma, Mr. Hades is the chef specially hired by Miss Nancy. I was just about to take him to the dormitory to rest. You see. Bosan tried to help Meg out of the situation. This third lady was not to be trifled with. Bosan, you can go. I will personally take him to the dormitory to rest. Norma ordered directly. Bo-sang looked at Mag with pity, and then turned to leave. Although he was Nancy's personal butler, he still didn't have the guts to disobey Norma's orders. He could only ask Miss Nancy for instructions after he left. Only Meg and Norma were left in front of the building. Meg looked at Bo-san, who left without looking back, and then looked at Norma and asked, "Are you sure you want to rest in the dormitory with me?" I said bring. Norma blushed and jumped down from the low wall. Norma was not short, but Meg was too tall, so when she jumped down from the low wall, she had to look up at Meg, which weakened her aura. I know you're Nancy's loyal dog, but you got first place because of my snake liver. So, from today onwards, you have to be my slave. Do you understand? Norma crossed her arms and raised her voice a little. Did you give me grass? Meg frowned and shook his head. I got first place with my own ability. The snake liver was provided by the program crew and eaten by the judges. What does it have to do with me? You. Norma choked and was speechless for a moment. If there's nothing else, I'll go back to the dormitory to rest. Meg walked past Norma sideways and stopped at the door. He turned back and said, I'm not used to sleeping with others, so please go back. With that, he walked into the villa under Norma's wide-eyed gaze. Is this guy rejecting me to accompany him in bed? There's actually such a person in this world. Norma opened her mouth slightly and only came back to her senses after a while. Wait. When did I say I was going to sleep with him? Bastard, stop right there. Norma yelled angrily with her hands on her hips. Meg had already arrived at the dormitory on the second floor with a smile on his face. Rich young ladies like Nancy and Norma had no lack of bootlickers around them. Bootlickers of all grades and breeds. For a woman like Nancy, who was as pure and holy as a white lotus, you only needed to show her your ability and uniqueness to attract her attention. As for a brat like Norma, you could not spoil her. The more you did not follow her wishes, the more motivated she would be and the more she would want to regain her sense of superiority and confidence from you. Meg had already made up his mind to use Norma as a breakthrough, so he naturally wanted to give her a memorable first encounter. The dormitory was not big, but it was not small as a single dormitory. It was about 50 square meters, with a bedroom, a bathroom, a small living room, and an entertainment area. It was also equipped with a small kitchen with a full set of kitchen utensils that could be used for simple cooking. This was one of the perks of being a specially hired chef. If it were a normal servant, they would live in a multi-person dormitory. Before he sat down, the doorbell rang outside the door. She's really impatient. Meg unbuttoned his shirt and opened the door. Norma, who was outside the door with her little fists clenched and angrily slammed the door, landing 2 heavy punches on Meg's chest. His shirt was open, his sturdy chest, and 2 light sounds of fists hitting flesh. The atmosphere at the door suddenly became a little strange. End of chapter. Chapter 2482. Norma was completely dumbfounded. She even forgot to retract her hand from Meg's chest. What's the matter? Meg asked coldly. Norma retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. She quickly covered her face, but her eyes could be seen through the gaps between her fingers. She said angrily, Why aren't you wearing any clothes? I was about to take a shower when I heard someone ring the doorbell. I thought it was Butler Boson, Meg said matter-of-factly. Also, I'm wearing clothes. Norma's gaze moved down slightly. Meg was indeed wearing clothes, but his clothes were completely open, revealing his firm chest and 8-pack abs. The lines and contours that were carved by a knife were full of visual impact. Unlike those greasy youths who only wanted to show off their muscles, Hades's muscles did not look that exaggerated. They were restrained and full of strength. He was muscular without clothes and thin with clothes on. Therefore, Norma did not expect Meg, who looked a little thin, to have such excellent muscle lines. However, after some reflection, she seemed to be able to find some clues from the show. How could a man who could carry a 10-kilogram iron rod and hit it more than 20,000 times be a firewood stick? Have you seen enough? Meg asked as he buttoned his shirt. Norma's throat moved, and she unconsciously swallowed her saliva. When she heard that, she immediately became like an angry little lion. She said angrily, according to McCarthy Manor's employee code of conduct, all employees must dress appropriately in the manor. You've broken the rules on your first day at the manor. The dormitory is the employee's private space. It's not within the scope of having to dress appropriately. This is clearly stated in the employee code of conduct. Do you wear a uniform in the bedroom too? Meg smiled, not afraid at all. Who said that? I'll change the employee code of conduct right now. Norma was a little unconfident. Of course, she did not know what was written in the employee code of conduct. She only vaguely knew that this was to scare Hades, who was on his first day. Please go ahead. I'm going to take a shower. Please go back. Meg's expression was still cold as he prepared to close the door. Norma felt humiliated. No man had ever dared to reject her again and again. Furthermore, he was only an employee, a chef. I'm hungry. Aren't you a special chef? I want you to make me lunch. Norma ordered. My contract will take effect tomorrow, so I'm not obligated to serve you today. Meg shook his head slightly. Then, just as Norma was on the verge of exploding, he said, but I'm going to make lunch for myself later. I can make you one while I'm at it. Conveniently. Norma frowned. She felt that she had never been treated so half-heartedly by a servant in her life. This feeling was very special. Then I'll wait for you at the restaurant. Norma turned and prepared to leave. I'm not going to the kitchen to cook. I'm going to cook something simple in the dormitory. If you want to eat, come in. Meg turned around and entered the room. Eat in the dormitory. Norma was shocked, but looking at the open door, she hesitated for a while before gritting her teeth and walking in. What was there to be afraid of? This was McCarthy Manor. Could it be that this fellow still dared to do anything to her? This was Norma's first time entering the staff dormitory. Her first impression was that it was cramped. All kinds of spaces that should have been separated were all squeezed into the small room. The sofa was even single-person, and the kitchen could only accommodate one person. It was really too small. Take a seat first. I'm going to take a shower. I'll cook later. Meg first started cooking in the rice cooker. He took a set of clothes and walked towards the bathroom as he spoke familiarly. Norma looked at the bathroom door that was slowly closing with her mouth agape. This fellow actually left her here to dry while he went to take a shower. Through the blurry bathroom glass door, the sound of water could be heard clearly. The strange atmosphere made Norma's face turn red, and she was a little restless. It was her first time waiting for a man to come out of the shower to cook for her. She suddenly regretted it. She should not have come in. It seemed like she had accidentally fallen into his trap. But now, she did not want to leave. If she left just like that, wouldn't it seem like she was afraid? The blurry glass door outlined a blurry figure. Associating it with the scene she saw at the door earlier, Norma's mind could not help but start to fill in the water that flowed down his firm chest, over his abs that were like washboards, and then down, patter. The bathroom door opened, and Meg, who had changed into a fresh shirt, walked out. There was a towel around his neck, and he was drying his wet hair. Then, he faced Norma, whose face was flushed red. There was a faint fragrance of shower gel in the air, and the atmosphere was a little ambiguous. Norma, who was facing the bathroom door, was shocked. She quickly looked away and explained, I'm not looking. I'm just thinking about something. Then why are you blushing in a teapot? Meg ignored her. He threw the towel and clothes into the washing machine, and then went straight to the kitchen area. Although it was called a kitchen, it was more accurate to say that it was an open single-person workstation. There was a single stove, a cutting table, and a washing table. It was suitable for 1 or 2 people to cook at home. Meg took an apron and put it on. He opened the fridge and took out a few ingredients. Beef, eggs, onions, garlic, and tomatoes. Judging from the freshness, they should have just been put in the fridge in the morning. They were not high-grade ingredients, but they were enough. The freshly cooked rice grains were clear, and there was no excess water on the surface. It completely met the standards of making fried rice. Meg began to prepare the ingredients and cook. The blush on Norma's face had not faded. She sat down on the sofa and opened her wristband to browse the web, but her eyes were secretly glancing at Meg. His posture was tall and straight, and the side of his face looked sharp. The corners of his mouth seemed to be slightly raised at all times. He looked very intimate, but also seemed to be mocking something. The chefs in McCarthy Manor were mostly middle-aged uncles, and there were also quite a few old grandpas. The chefs who were selected were all experienced chefs. How could there be such a young and handsome chef? Humph. No matter what he cooks later, I definitely won't eat a single bite. I want to let him know the dangers of this world. Norma thought to herself. She had already begun to plan her lines. The beef was cut into cubes, and spices were added to stir-fry. The rice and eggs were mixed together, and they gradually blended. Then, the beef was added to stir-fry. Finally, a handful of tender green onions were sprinkled, and they were stir-fried. Then, a pot of tomato and egg soup was boiled. 2 plates of beef and egg fried rice, 2 bowls of tomato and egg soup, and 2 spoons. A simple lunch was completed. Let's eat. Meg placed the fried rice and soup on the dining table and said to Norma. This is the lunch you prepared for me. It's so simple. Gulp. Norma sat at the dining table and said with disdain. Before she could finish her sentence, a strong fragrance assailed her nose. She could not help but swallow her saliva, and even her words were interrupted. It smells so good. Norma looked at the fried rice in front of her in disbelief. End of chapter. Chapter 2483. The golden eggs wrapped the rice perfectly, and the grains were distinct. The red beef cubes were embellished with an attractive oily glow, and the green onions were the finishing touch, adding color to the fried rice. The rich aroma of the fried beef and eggs intertwined, harmonious and beautiful. Rumble, she wanted to reorganize her emotions and say something harsh, but her stomach failed her and growled. Norma's expression collapsed. She had already picked up the spoon and quickly scooped a spoonful of fried rice into her mouth. The soft rice was wrapped in an egg. With a bite, the aroma of the egg overflowed. A piece of beef was mixed in with the egg. It had a slightly chewy texture and brought about an incomparably delicious experience as the gravy splattered. The satisfaction of being filled made Norma's eyes light up instantly. Norma had eaten countless delicacies, and McCarthy Manor had the best chefs in the underground city. However, the fried rice with beef and eggs in front of her gave her a pleasant surprise. One bite after another, the plate of fried rice was emptied in the blink of an eye. Norma licked the corner of her mouth, feeling a little unsatisfied. Then she used the spoon to drink a few mouthfuls of soup. The tomato and egg soup was sweet and refreshing, and it was perfect to go with the fried rice. After a while, the soup bowl and plate were emptied, and Norma put down the spoon in her hand. This lunch was very simple, and she had never eaten such a simple lunch before. However, she was very satisfied with the meal, both physically and mentally. Norma looked up at Meg, who was eating quietly. He did not show any expression of anticipation or praise, but instead seemed to be a little dissatisfied. The heat of the beef is a little lacking, and it needs to be adjusted, Meg muttered to himself. He was indeed a little dissatisfied. Strangely, Norma felt that the man in front of her seemed to be glowing. He was different from the ordinary men. Although he was not a rich man, his attitude towards cooking was worthy of respect. I say, tonight you still have to. Before Norma could finish her sentence, the doorbell rang. Meg got up and opened the door. Nancy was standing at the door. Although her expression was cold, her eyes were filled with concern. I heard from Boss Song that Norma came to look for you. Did she make things difficult for you? She's in my room. Meg shrugged. What? Nancy stared blankly for a moment before revealing a shocked expression. You guys, how long had it been? Meg had actually brought Norma back to the room. I'm just here to eat. Don't think too much about it. Norma seemed to have heard the complicated emotions in Nancy's tone and immediately jumped to the door. Then, she looked at Nancy and said with some ridicule, Sister Nancy, you really do care about him. You rushed over in such a hurry. Are you afraid that I'll eat him? Eat. Nancy glanced at Norma, who was still dressed neatly, and saw the plates on the dining table through the gap between the two of them. It seemed that they had indeed eaten together, and it was Meg who had cooked. That's all for today. I'll go back first. Don't forget our agreement. Norma winked at Meg, then squeezed past Nancy with a smile. She walked briskly, humming a little tune as she left. Meg could see that this girl didn't have much malice towards him. She just wanted to suppress Nancy. Do you want to come in and sit for a while? Meg looked at Nancy and asked. Nancy thought for a moment, then nodded and followed Meg into the room. Norma could enter, but she knew why Nancy couldn't. This was also her first time entering the staff dormitory. In order to avoid suspicion, she always kept a certain distance with the staff of the opposite sex, including Boson. Meg cleared the plates on the table, poured a glass of water for Nancy, and asked, Have you eaten lunch? Not yet. I'll make something simple for you. Nancy wanted to refuse. There would be a family dinner later, but when she looked at Norma's clean plate, she couldn't help but be curious about what they had eaten earlier. So, she nodded. Meg made a new plate of beef and egg fried rice for Nancy. After summing up his experience, his control of the heat of stir-fried beef improved a bit. Nancy sat on the sofa and watched Meg cook. This feeling was a bit special. In a small room, a man in casual clothes with an apron cooking for you, just like a family in the movies. In her world, this kind of scene had never appeared before. She also never thought that in the future, there would be a man cooking lunch for her in their home. At this moment, she felt that it was quite beautiful. Then she couldn't help but laugh at her strange thoughts. But when she looked at Meg's serious side profile, she was a bit dazed. Beef and egg fried rice. There aren't many ingredients in the fridge, but the quality is not bad. Meg put the fried rice in front of Nancy and smiled. Thank you. Nancy nodded slightly and hid the strange look in her eyes. She picked up the spoon and elegantly finished the entire plate of beef fried rice. It was no wonder that the picky Norma would dine in Mag's tiny room. This plate of beef and egg fried rice was too delicious. The control of the heat of the stir-fried beef was just right. The beef was chewy but not hard to chew. The tender taste required a very high control of the heat. After eating the fried rice, Nancy got up and said goodbye. Before she left, she reminded Meg to be more cautious of Norma. Meg smiled and said okay. After closing the door, he accepted Norma's friend request. Looking at the girl's profile picture who sent him a string of emojis, the corners of Meg's mouth curled up. It was obvious that the fish had taken the bait. Meg forwarded the screenshot of his chat with Norma to she and briefly reported that he had successfully hooked up with Norma. It's only been half a day and he's hooked up with Norma. Is this guy really that charming? She looked at the picture sent by Meg and fell into deep thought. However, this was indeed a good progress for the mission. Norma was Gardner's daughter. Gardner was a core member of the McCarthy family and was in charge of external affairs. It was very likely that he was related to Senator Tam's disappearance. If Meg intended to use Norma as a breakthrough, it was indeed a good choice. What do you plan to do next? She replied. If your information is correct, Norma is indeed very doted on by Gardner. I'll try my best to get information about Senator Tam from her. Be careful. She replied and closed the chat interface. Meg stood at the dormitory window and looked at the manor. From the angle of the window, he could only see a very small area, which did not include the living area and activity area of the McCarthy family members. He actually already had all the information needed for this mission in his hands. He only needed a reasonable scenario to obtain this information and then he could leave. There were 3 supernatural powerhouses guarding the McCarthy manor. He had no reason to risk his life for a newbie mission. In the afternoon, Meg took a nap and then went downstairs to the public area below the dormitory to have a brief conversation with the head chef and take a look at the kitchen. From tomorrow onwards, he would officially join the kitchen of this huge manor and take on part of the cooking work. After coming out of the kitchen that was far larger than a 5-star hotel, Meg received a message from Norma. I want to eat your cooking tonight. Come to my villa now. I'll cook noodles for you. Meg replied. I don't want noodles. I want to eat lamb chops. Charcoal grilled lamb chops. Norma sent a voice message. It was her loss that this girl could not taste the knife-shaved noodles he made. Meg sent another message. Employees are not allowed to enter the core area. I can't come. I've already sent someone to pick you up. Just as Meg saw the message, a driverless car stopped beside him. The door opened automatically and an electronic voice came from the car. Hades, identity confirmed. Please get in the car and head to Miss Norma's residence. It's not against the rules if someone finds out about this, right? Meg was not in a hurry to get in the car. Instead, he sent a message to Norma. Cooking for your employer is your job. You'll be my full-time chef from now on. As I said, as long as you perform well, I'll give you a raise. Meg got in the car and did not reply to Norma's message. If the chef's dormitory was considered a luxurious residence for workers, then Norma's villa that occupied more than 1,000 square meters should be called a pink castle. Even with the advancement of technology, young girls still could not change their passion for pink. Of course, this pink was quite high-end. The glass walls were a sparkling pink like pink diamonds. It was soft and dazzling, and the various colors complemented each other. It did not completely fill the entire castle with pink. It was full of young girls' hearts and was quite pleasing to the eye. Needless to say, this must have been the work of a top designer. Meg alighted from the driverless car and was led into the villa by a sweet-looking maid. Meg looked at the maid's pink cat ears. She was obviously a young orc lady. I asked you to come, but you don't seem to be very happy. A large chair was placed on the raised ground in the hall. Norma crossed her legs and looked down at Meg. Meg sat on the high seat like a queen. Norma wanted to laugh. Normal people would not be able to do such a thing without at least 10 years of Chinibu. What kind of reward is cooking for you? Mag asked in return. Of course. Many chefs want to cook for me, but they don't have such an opportunity. It's your honor. Norma lifted her chin slightly. Unfortunately, there are many people who want to eat my cooking. Moreover, it's not working hours now, Meg said calmly. Norma narrowed her eyes. Meg was not lying. With his popularity these few days, it was not an exaggeration to say that he was the most popular man in the underground city. You're already here. Are you going to leave without doing anything? Norma came down from the high platform and walked in front of Meg. The high platform slowly descended behind her until it was level with the ground. The large chair expanded to become a sofa. So this problem would not act up in front of everyone. Ha, fake woman. I charge. It's very expensive. Meg looked at Norma and said in a low voice. The maid at the side opened her mouth slightly and looked at Meg in shock. Although she was a huge fan of this handsome guy, she was still worried about his safety when he dared to speak to Miss Norma like this. Expensive. Ha, the thing I don't lack the most is money. Norma raised her hand and a transfer interface lit up on her bracelet. How much? 1 million, Meg said. Norma tapped her finger twice and 1 million was transferred. Meg's bracelet lit up and 1 million was transferred to his account. A real rich woman was so overbearing. Where's the kitchen? Meg asked directly as he received the money to do things. I'll take you there. The cat-eared maid said softly. The shock on her face had not faded. The man in front of her actually got 1 million from Miss Norma. He was so daring. Meg followed the maid into the kitchen in the basement. Compared to Meg's shabby workbench, the kitchen in Norma's villa was luxurious. It took up more than 100 square meters and had all kinds of kitchenware and cutlery. There were also 2 large freezers in the corner filled with all kinds of ingredients. There was a charcoal grill on the workbench. The charcoal fire had already been lit. There was a large piece of lamb chop on the side dish table. It was obviously freshly processed. The lamb blood had not solidified and was very fresh. Since Norma wanted to eat charcoal grilled lamb chop, Meg made it for her. As the saying went, to conquer a woman, one had to start from conquering her stomach. Those who could reach her stomach in one step would not be able to escape. The maid stood at the side and looked at Meg with admiration. Is there anything I can help you with? No, thank you, Meg rejected coldly. He washed his hands, put on an apron, and began to process the ingredients. Norma walked around outside twice and could not help but come in. She called herself a supervisor and even asked the maid to bring her a comfortable chair. So this is what it feels like to be a judge of the Chef King competition, Norma said as she nestled comfortably on the sofa and watched Meg put the lamb chop on the grill. Meg raised his eyebrows. Good girl, was she playing a live game here? Meg could be considered to be a master at charcoal grilled lamb chop. It was slowly grilled over the charcoal fire and brushed with the sauce. The aroma gradually thickened. The master and maid watched from the side and had already swallowed their saliva countless times. Water, Norma turned her head and ordered, but her eyes could not move away from the golden lamb chop on the grill. The aroma was too strong and too tempting. It had an irresistible penetrating power. Moreover, watching the lamb chop slowly turn golden with the charcoal fire, listening to the sizzling sound of oil, and smelling the aroma, the gluttonous baby in her stomach was aroused. The little maid quickly went to pour a cup of water. She was looking at Mag with even more admiration in her eyes. Once the heat was in place, Meg took the lamb chop out of the oven and placed it on the plate. Along the gap between the lamb chop, he cut the lamb chop into smaller pieces, which were more suitable for a girl to eat gracefully. Finally, he sprinkled a handful of tender green onions to decorate, and the charcoal grilled lamb chop was completed. A whole lamb chop filled a big plate. "It's done. Please enjoy," Meg looked at Norma and said. Norma had already stood up from the chair and walked to the counter. Looking at the golden lamb chop that was emitting a strong aroma, she could not help but gulp. "I'll bring it to the dining table," the maid came forward and said softly. "Let me try it first and see if it's really that good." Norma could not wait to reach out and grab a piece of lamb chop. Hiss! "It's hot." Norma immediately retracted her hand and pinched the maid's cat ears to lower her temperature. The maid looked innocent, but did not dare to say anything. After lowering the temperature of her fingers, Norma put on a thin glove that insulated heat and grabbed another lamb chop. She brought it to her mouth and blew on it before carefully opening her mouth to take a bite of the lamb chop. The crispy skin wrapped around the tender and juicy lamb. With just a light bite, the rich juices and oil exploded in her mouth. The slight spicy meat taste collided with the tip of her tongue, and her taste buds instantly went out of control. "Ah!" A long and uncontrollable moan made Norma's face blush instantly. But this lamb chop was too delicious. Grilled meat was no stranger to Norma. There were 2 chefs in the manor who were very good at grilling meat. Every time they had a meal together, the 2 of them would roast all kinds of meat products. But she had never eaten such a delicious and special lamb chop. When she saw Nancy lose her composure on the show, she had mocked her for being inexperienced. She did not expect that when she tasted this lamb chop in person today, it did not look very promising. The unique aroma of the grilled fruit permeated the lamb, and the unique sauce was irresistible. If she were a judge of the Chef King competition, she would not be able to resist giving full marks, right? "This is too delicious." Norma could not help but praise. Then, she glanced at Meg. No wonder Nancy thought so highly of him and even sent a fighter jet to protect his safety. The maid could not help but swallow her saliva. Previously, when she watched the live broadcast with Miss, she had secretly swallowed her saliva countless times. Today, when she saw Meg grilling the lamb chop with her own eyes and smelled the aroma, how could she resist this temptation? "Here, you have a piece too." Norma took a lamb chop from the plate, shook it slightly to cool it, and handed it to the maid. "Thank you, Mississippi." The little maid was flattered and took the lamb chop. She took 2 steps back and blew on it. Then, she took a small bite. Her eyes immediately narrowed into crescent moons. She held it and ate it in small bites, just like a little squirrel. Meg watched this scene. Norma treated her subordinates well and did not treat them badly at all. Norma finished 2 lamb chop and was somewhat full. Only then did she feel a little uncomfortable eating standing in the kitchen. She ordered, "Let's eat in the dining room." The maid quickly wiped her hands clean and carefully carried the lamb chop out of the kitchen with both hands. She went straight to the dining room on the first floor. Meg took off his apron and went upstairs to prepare to go back. He had finished his work, and Norma looked very satisfied. The 3 of them had just reached the first floor when a maid quickly walked over and said respectfully, "Miss, Master is here." Just as she finished speaking, the villa's door opened and a thin middle-aged man walked in. Meg looked at the person and raised his eyebrows slightly. He quickly regained his composure, but was not in a hurry to leave. He took half a step back and stood beside the maid. "Father!" Norma exclaimed with some surprise. She jumped forward and held the middle-aged man's arm. "When did you come back? Didn't you say that you would only be back next week?" "Something happened in Tucker City, so I came back early." The middle-aged man with a cold temperament smiled when he looked at Norma. His eyes were full of affection. "I went to see the chief, so I came to see my baby daughter first." As he said that, his gaze swept past the little maid, and landed on Mag. His long and narrow eyes narrowed instantly, and there was a dangerous glint in them. You came at the right time. I just grilled lamb chop. Let's eat together. Norma pulled Gardner to the dining table. Gardner sat down and looked at the grilled lamb chop on the table. He looked at Meg again and asked, "Are you Hades?" "Yes." Meg nodded slightly. The person in front of him was the target of his trip, Gardner. He did not expect to meet him on the first day of entering McCarthy Manor. "Father, you know him too." Norma held a lamb chop in her hand and asked in surprise. "How many people in the underground city don't know him now?" Gardner smiled. The Dixon family had suffered a great loss this time. Fergus had been killed and they had lost a half-step transcendent realm master for no apparent reason. This young man in front of him could be said to be the fuse of this entire incident. It seemed that Nancy brought him back to McCarthy Manor not only to admire his cooking skills, but also to protect him. Meg lowered his head and did not say anything. He let the system take a few photos. Gardner did not have much interest in Meg. The fact that he could enter McCarthy Manor meant that the family had conducted an in-depth investigation on him. There should be no problem with his background. The incident with Fergus could only be considered a coincidence. A mere chef was not enough to pique his interest. Then try this lamb chop. It's delicious. Norma took a lamb chop and handed it to Gardner. Gardner took the lamb chop. It was still a little hot. It should have been roasted not long ago. The meat was quite fragrant. He opened his mouth and took a bite. His eyes immediately lit up. As one of the few people at the top of the underground city's power hierarchy, his desire for food had long become dull. However, the taste of this roasted lamb chop stunned him. The tender lamb chop did not become dry after being roasted by the charcoal fire. The slightly charred skin was crispy and fragrant. As he chewed, the juices flew in his mouth. It was very satisfying. In just 2 or 3 bites, half of the lamb chop was gone. "Bring the wine." Gardner ordered the maid beside him. "Yes." The maid quickly left and soon came back with a small cart. She opened the bottle, poured the wine, sobered it up, and divided the wine in one go. A glass of red wine was placed in front of Gardner. Gardner took a sip of the wine and then picked up a lamb chop. He chewed it carefully, his face showing some joy. He had not felt satisfied with food for a long time. This roasted lamb chop was indeed unique. Your culinary skills are not bad. Gardner put down the lamb chop in his hand and looked at Meg as he spoke. Your daughter is not bad either. Meg was neither servile nor overbearing as he said, "Thank you." All of the female servants looked at Mag with surprise and envy in their eyes. Lord Mag had never praised any of his servants before, but he was very appreciative of Hades. "You can go back first. I'll get the car to send you back to the dormitory," Norma said to Meg and gave the maid a look. "Okay." Meg nodded slightly. "Please follow me." The maid led Meg out of the door. The driverless car was still parked at the door. The door was already open. Meg got into the car. The maid blushed and said, "Mr. Hades, I'm your fan. Your roasted lamb chop is really delicious. I like it very much." Meg's face showed a gentle smile. He nodded slightly and said, "Thank you. Please go back." The door closed slowly. The driverless car started slowly and drove away from the villa area. His smile is so gentle. Oh no, it's the feeling of falling in love. The maid covered her chest. Her face was red all the way to her ears. End of chapter. Chapter 2484. Meg went straight back to the dormitory and sent a message to She. It's going well. There were 2 photos attached. One was of Norma munching on a lamb chop with an intoxicated expression, while the other was of Gardner drinking red wine and munching on a lamb chop. What's the plan next? She quickly replied to Meg. I think that if the McCarthy family is involved in Senator Tam's kidnapping, it must be under Gardner's command. I've gained Norma's trust and have the opportunity to directly contact Gardner, but I need someone who can help me hack into the McCarthy bracelet. Meg's plan was very simple. It was to rationalize the acquisition of evidence. He had the encrypted letters from Gardner and the McCarthy patriarch in his hands. Now, he just needed to let she and Ferdinand think that his method of obtaining information was reasonable and that they would not associate it with other help. She was silent for a few minutes before replying. Tomorrow at 6:00 in the morning, someone will send the cracking robot to the 3rd tree outside your dormitory. This is a standalone version. I'll send the tutorial to your bracelet for you to learn the specific operation method. Okay. Meg closed the chat interface. Big brother, this incident has caused the Dixon family to be in a terrible state. I'm afraid that Ferdinand is behind this. We have to be more careful, Gardner said to the dignified man sitting opposite him. Now they all think that we're behind this. Nancy brought that kid back. Although there's no problem with the background check, you have to be more careful, Archie said in a low voice. I've just seen that kid. His culinary skills are really good. He can catch Nancy's eye, and at such a young age, he shouldn't be one of Ferdinand's men. Gardner shook his head slightly and his expression became more solemn. As for the judge, I'm afraid we have to respond to the Dixon family's hunting plan. Whether he's one of Ferdinand's men or not, he has broken the rules and must be killed in time. I'll leave this matter to you, but we don't have to worry about it. There are plenty of people in the Dixon family who are eager to take revenge. Why is this lamb chop so delicious? It's so delicious. Norma was slumped on the sofa, holding a glass of happy water in her hand. She sighed as she sipped. Mr. Hades is the best chef I've ever seen. He's like a god. The little maid's eyes were full of stars. Now that I've eaten the roast lamb chop, it's time for the beef meatballs. Norma tilted her head and ordered, Go and tell the kitchen to leave me a cow, the living kind. We'll eat meatballs tomorrow. Yes, yes, yes. The little maid nodded her little head and excitedly went out to make a phone call. Norma, that girl, is really hopeless. Nancy listened to Bozang's report and pinched the space between his eyebrows, feeling a headache coming on. Fortunately, Norma didn't make things difficult for Meg. They all stared at Meg with their bright eyes. If it weren't for the strict rules during working hours, they would definitely rush up to ask for his autograph and take a photo with him. Meg also didn't expect that one day he would be able to enjoy the treatment of a celebrity when he went out. He went straight to the 2nd floor and came to the exclusive workstation that the head chef had arranged for him yesterday. There were already 2 beautiful kitchen maids and 2 young chefs waiting there. The specially hired chefs had a high status in the kitchen of McCarthy Manor, second only to the head chef. There were only 8 specially hired chefs in the entire kitchen. Every specially hired chef had several assistant chefs under him. These were the young chefs who followed him. Mr. Hades. When the 4 chefs saw Meg coming, they greeted him one after another. The eyes of the 2 kitchen maids were shining. The other specially hired chefs were not young anymore. Besides, they stayed in the kitchen all year round, so they were somewhat greasy. However, Mr. Hades looked even more handsome than on TV. His skin was smooth and delicate, and he had a noble demeanor. He was simply the prince of the kitchen. Meg got to know them briefly. He didn't mind the existence of kitchen helpers. For a professional chef, cooking wasn't a matter of one person. Having someone to take care of the details could save a lot of energy for the head chef. The 4 chefs looked very happy. If they knew that he was only here for a day trip, how would they feel? According to Meg's request, the kitchen quickly sent a plate of warm beef. Meg sped up the hammering and finished a big pot of bursting hand meatballs in half an hour. The task of dividing the meatballs was handed over to the 2 kitchen maids. Meg clocked out. Working seems to be pretty good. Walking on the path after work, the first experience of working was pretty good. Mr. Hades is so awesome. 26,000 times, and he didn't even rest for a second in between. I just tried to grab his iron stick. Well, it's so big that I can't lift it with one hand. No wonder he's the first man to get full marks in the Chef King competition. His skills are amazing. I'm willing to call him the strongest chef. The kitchen helpers hadn't recovered from the shock yet. Their admiration for Meg was like a torrential river. Hundreds of core members of the McCarthy family lived in the McCarthy Manor. If there were no special circumstances, hundreds of people wouldn't eat together. The kitchen would serve the dishes according to each person's request. This morning, the most ordered dish was Hades's bursting hand meatballs. Oh, so hot, so hot. Norma ordered 2 servings of bursting hand meatballs. She ate 1.5, and the little maid ate the other half. After fully experiencing the pleasure of the hot broth exploding in her mouth, Norma sighed with tears in her eyes. But, it's so delicious. A bowl of bursting hand meatballs successfully refreshed the breakfast menu of many members of the McCarthy family, attracting countless praises. At noon, Meg made charcoal grilled lamb chops and stir-fried pork loin, 20 servings each. Among the 8 specially hired chefs on the second floor, he was the busiest. Meg saw a red in the eyes of the old chefs, and heard a few sarcastic complaints. But was Meg the kind of person who cared about this kind of thing? He was ready to take the bucket and run. He didn't want to stay here with these old men. After clocking in at noon, Meg took off his apron and left the kitchen in a relaxed manner. Although 20 servings of lamb chops and stir-fried pork loin seemed like a lot of work, for Mr. Mac, who was used to serving dozens of dishes for hundreds of guests, it was a piece of cake. Come to my room after you're done cooking. As soon as Meg left the kitchen building, his wristband vibrated. He received a message from Norma. A familiar drone stopped in front of him. Meg confirmed that this was a room. It should be a room in a house, not a room in a room. Then, he got into the car. As soon as the car started, Meg received another message. This time, it wasn't from Norma, but Nancy. Are you free this afternoon? Let's have tea together. Come to my room. Am I that popular? Meg couldn't help but reflect on what he had done in the past few days. No matter how he thought about it, it was all his personal charm that had nowhere to go. Sorry, I'm already in Norma's car. The door is locked. Meg replied to Nancy. Nancy didn't reply. Meg guessed that she was probably angry. But he didn't panic at all. She wasn't his woman. If she was angry, so be it. It had nothing to do with him. The drone stopped in front of the villa. Meg got out and was greeted by the cat-eared maid. Mr. Hades, please come with me. The maid smiled sweetly and led Meg into the villa. In the hall, Norma was sitting and drinking tea. Sitting opposite her was Gardner and a beautiful woman with a plump figure. The beautiful woman looked to be in her early 30s. She had a pair of peach blossom eyes like Norma, but her mature charm was far from what a silly girl like Norma could compare to. Her slender waist made her seem even taller. The waist-to-hip ratio was the kind that could take a man's life. Her skin was moist as if water could be squeezed out of it. Hearing the sound, she turned around and glanced at Meg with a smile on her lips. She was charming and unapproachable. She was obviously Norma's biological mother. Unfortunately, that girl didn't even have the slightest knowledge. This time, if Gardner praised his cooking skills again, he would have to add, "Your wife is really not bad." Meg was calm. After all, he was a man who had seen countless women. He wouldn't be charmed by a mature woman. After taking a look, he looked away and stopped a few meters away. The woman's eyes showed some surprise. This young man was young, but his composure was stronger than those old foxes from big families. He didn't even look at her. She didn't believe that there was a man in this world who wasn't charmed by her. If there was a chance, she would test him again. "You're here." Norma's eyes lit up when she saw Meg, but she glanced at Gardner sitting opposite her. She lowered her voice and said, "Our family has a small gathering at noon. You're in charge of cooking. This is overtime. You have to pay more." Meg was about to say something, but he held back. He had no choice but to work as a worker. Given Norma's family status, he could indeed cook for them at any time. This was a super privileged person among the privileged. "Okay." Meg followed the maid to the kitchen. "This chef is quite young." The beautiful woman's voice came from behind. "But I'm living well." Meg followed the maid into the kitchen and began to grill lamb chops, stir-fry kidney, and casually stir-fry 2 vegetarian dishes. This meal was considered complete. The chef didn't have to wait by the side when the host was eating. Meg took 2 photos and let the nanomachines out for a spin. Then, he took the drone back to the dormitory. "I've received accurate information. Gardner was indeed behind the kidnapping of Senator Tam. He's now being held in this place. I'm leaving McCarthy Manor now. Meet me at the rendezvous point." Meg sent a message to She, then left the dormitory and walked straight to McCarthy Manor's gate. McCarthy Manor was not a place where one could enter and leave at will. However, Meg took a resignation letter and left the manor successfully. After turning the corner and getting into She's flying car where there was no one around, Meg sent Nancy a sincere resignation letter. "Dear Miss Nancy, by the time you see this letter, I'll have left. I'm still that young man who yearns for freedom. I like poetry and faraway places. You're very good. McCarthy Manor is also very good. Unfortunately, it's not suitable for me. See you again. Hades. Where are you going?" She looked at Meg and asked. "This place." Meg sent Nancy a coordinate. 1,800 kilometers northwest of Tucker City, in Pembroke Town. The flying car entered stealth mode and drove away from Tucker City. "You are very suitable to be a spy." After the flying car left Tucker City, she looked at Meg and said seriously. "After Senator Tam went missing, the military investigated many times but found nothing." Meg had only been in McCarthy Manor for 2 days, but he had already obtained important information from Gardner about where Senator Tam might be held. "You should know that before I became a chef, I was a soldier," Meg said calmly. "This is a professional output. It's nothing." Nancy nodded in agreement. She did not think that Meg was bragging. On the other side, Nancy looked at the resignation letter she received with a look of surprise. "Miss, Hades has indeed left the manor. His work pass and uniform are in the dormitory. According to the surveillance, he left directly from the main entrance." Bo-san quickly walked in and reported. He also could not hide the surprise on his face. How dare he? This was the same thought in both of their minds. Nancy was worried. Hades had provoked the Dixon family and they could not wait to kill him. In order for him to reach McCarthy Manor safely, she even used her private warship. As long as he was in McCarthy Manor, she could protect him. However, he had secretly left and only sent her this resignation letter after he left. It must be that girl Norma who pushed him too hard. He couldn't adapt to the life of a tycoon, so he chose to leave. Nancy was a little annoyed and anxious. She ordered Bo-san, send someone to find him. Also, keep this a secret. Don't let anyone else know. Yes, Mississippi. Bo-san received the order and left, but he could not help but curse inwardly. Who knew how many people outside were trying to enter McCarthy Manor, but this guy, after becoming a specially hired chef, had run away with a bucket before completing his day's work. How dare he be so carefree? Nancy sent a few messages to Meg, but they all failed. She even received a red one. He actually blacklisted me. Nancy raised her eyebrows, vaguely angry. Meg did not blacklist the Southern Hilla, but directly deactivated the bracelet. The Hades identity had completed its mission. It was reasonable for a person who did not exist to disappear. Pembroke Town, a forgotten industrial town. 500 years ago, this place had prospered for a period of time because of the production of a kind of ore called black gold. However, in just a short 100 years, the ore was mined out, and this place quickly declined, leaving behind many huge mining machinery and abandoned factories buried by sand and stones. No one lived here. The flying car stopped at a high altitude 5 kilometers away. Mag looked at that abandoned industrial town, and said, "This is one of the undead's secret hideouts." According to Gardner, they sent Counselor Tam here directly after kidnapping him 10 days ago. However, we can't be sure if Counselor Tam is still here. From the internal information of the undead stolen from the system, Meg could confirm that Senator Tam was still imprisoned in this stronghold, but he did not know if he was alive or dead. She frowned slightly and looked at the deserted town in the distance. She said, "I think we need reinforcements. The terrain here is complicated, and there is no information about the terrain at all. Once we alert them, they may leave directly through the secret passage or kill the senator. There's no need. Reinforcements will only be a burden. As usual, you cover me. I'll go in to save him." Meg opened the car door and jumped out. A black heavy sword appeared under his feet and he swooped down, flying almost close to the ground at high speed, quickly approaching the town. "You." She looked at the flying sword that disappeared from her sight and shut her mouth helplessly. She could not control Meg, and she was used to this. However, for safety's sake, she mounted the heavy sniper at the front of the car and aimed in the direction of the town. At the same time, she reported the situation here to Ferdinand and asked for instructions on how to deal with it. Let him take the lead and cooperate fully. Ferdinand only replied with 8 words. She had a plan in mind and did not think too much about it. She sent the reconnaissance robot to investigate so that it could do the supporting work. Meg had the defensive layout of this stronghold in his mind. He avoided the sentry posts and formations and easily entered the town. Another reason why he was so confident was that this stronghold was only guarded by 2 level 10 powerhouses. It was not difficult to deal with them at all. The key to a secret stronghold was secrecy. The military was so powerful, but they had no idea that the immortals were hiding a stronghold in this deserted town. With 2 10th level masters equipped with a variety of high-tech equipment, even if a half-step transcendent realm master attacked, without a proper defensive map, it would be difficult for them to capture this stronghold in a short time, so they had more than enough time to react. Outside an abandoned mine, Meg leaned against the wall and slowly let go of the dead guard in his hand. After taking the pass, he changed his clothes and copied his face. Meg swaggered into the secret underground base. This base was based on the upgrade of the mine. It was located 1,000 meters underground and had layers of shielding formations. It was impossible to detect from the outside. Meg relied on his armor and successfully sneaked into the mine. He soon found a new target, a level 8 captain, who had changed to an armor with higher authority. He was here to save people, so ensuring the safety of the hostages was the most important thing. The internal structure of the mine was very complicated. Meg had obtained a high-level pass, but he was still blocked outside the cells of important prisoners. Have you confirmed the status of the hostages this morning? Meg asked the 2 guards outside the door in a voice imitated by the system. It has been confirmed. The hostages are in good condition. One of the guards nodded. Meg nodded and then killed the 2 guards. Using his wide sleeves, Fat Head Fish flashed and the thick alloy door shattered and fell to the ground. The sirens blared loudly, and the heavy machine guns aimed at the door roared, emitting blue flames, and the sound of gunfire could be heard. With a flash of sword light, the heavy machine gun was cut in half, completely scrapped. Meg dashed into the prison and swept his eyes across the small windows of the cells, finding his target in the last one. Once again, he cut open the alloy door and Meg entered the room. In the small room, a middle-aged man with disheveled hair sat in the corner, his back straight as he coldly stared at Meg. Who are you? I'm here to save you. Meg stepped forward to help him up. Senator Tam turned sideways to avoid Meg's hand and said, You should leave. There's a bomb on this lock. As long as I leave this prison, it will immediately explode and harm you. Meg looked at the exquisite shackles on his hands and feet and frowned. How vicious. System, how do I cut this? This is not easy to cut. The 2 shackles are connected. If you cut the upper one, the lower one will explode. If you cut the lower one, the upper one will explode. You have to cut them at the same time. Just tell me where to cut. My knife is very fast. It won't be able to react in time. Meg thought to himself. Outside the prison, there was the sound of dense footsteps and the sound of all kinds of guns being loaded. Hurry up and leave. When they surround you, you won't be able to leave. Senator Tam urged. The next moment, Meg saw 2 thin red lines appear on Tam's 2 shackles. He raised his hand and the knife fell. The 2 shackles were instantly cut into 2. Senator Tam looked at the shackles in his hands in a daze. After a while, he came back to his senses. They did not explode. Let's go. Meg put an emergency protective shield on Senator Tam's hand. After activating it, a light golden protective shield formed around his body. It was enough to withstand a bullet from a heavy machine gun. However, it only lasted for a minute. It was extremely short. The flying sword opened the way. A cold light flashed past, and the passage instantly fell silent. Bullets, heavy machine guns, people, knives, swords. Everything in the passage was cut in half. Meg grabbed Senator Tam with one hand and walked into the passage. He reached the door in one step. Who are you? At the entrance of the passage, a man wearing a black grimace mask covered his left broken arm. His hoarse voice was filled with fear as he looked at Meg, who was grabbing Senator Tam. Meg raised his hand to him. He subconsciously released a protective shield in front of him. A sword pierced through his heart from the back. Senator Tam was shocked beyond words. This level 10 powerhouse had died in such an aggrieved manner. Meg carried Senator Tam and rushed out. He massacred the entire secret base and returned to Shi's position in only 5 minutes. You're so fast. The flying car had been replaced by a battleship. She confirmed Senator Tam's identity and brought the still shocked Senator Tam onto the battleship. Although she did not see how Meg sneaked into the base and rescued Senator Tam, she was still shocked by how fast it took him only 5 minutes. As for her, she did not do anything. There are still more than 10 prisoners in the base's prison. Their identities are unknown, but they have bomb shackles on their hands. Meg showed the situation inside the base to She. Do you want to save them? She glanced at the shackles on Senator Tam's hands and feet. The incision was smooth and there were complicated wires inside. Our mission is to rescue Senator Tam. Now, we need to ensure the senator's safety. I'll report the situation here and someone else will take care of it. She decisively started the battleship and quickly took off. Mag looked at Shishi with admiration before taking a bottle of happy drink and sitting at the side. The interface of the bracelet showed a silent image of the base. 3 minutes later, a ghostly figure walked out of the shadows and checked the prison. Suddenly, he turned his head to look in the direction of the camera. A golden ghost face instantly approached, then the camera exploded and the image disappeared. An extraordinaire arrived at the scene within 5 minutes of the base's alarm. In that 1 second of eye contact through the screen, Meg was sure that he was no match for the extraordinaire. Just like how he was torturing a level 10 powerhouse like a dog, if a real extraordinaire wanted to take him down, he would definitely be suppressed. You are. Senator Tam drank some hot water and slowly calmed down. He asked tentatively. Hello, Councilman Tam. I'm Major Shi from the military. I'm here to rescue you. You're safe now. We'll send you directly to the military hospital for treatment. She set the autopilot and stood up to salute Councilman Tam. Senator Tam was obviously relieved when he heard that they were from the military. He said gratefully, "Thank you for your rescue." There were many visible wounds on his body. It was obvious what kind of inhumane treatment he had suffered in the base during this period. She took out the tools, removed the shackles on his hands and feet, and locked them in the explosion-proof box. According to She, the explosive yield of these 2 shackles was enough to blow the battleship into pieces. Then, she gave him emergency treatment to ensure that he was in good condition. Meg seemed to be resting with his eyes closed, but in fact, he was digesting some new information that his system had obtained through the secret base's entrance and accessing the Undying's intranet. Although the 10 tycoons of the underground city were not good people, Meg did not have a strong dislike for them. However, he wanted to get rid of this Undying organization. This organization's reach was too long. They had already reached the Norland continent and killed the Elven Queen. No matter what, she was still his cheap mother-in-law, Irina's biological mother. Although this mother-in-law did not give her blessings on their marriage, she did not force him to wash her feet. He had to take revenge for killing his mother-in-law. Moreover, from the internal information obtained by the system, the Undying had a god hunt plan. The target was the gods of the Norland continent. The Undying sought immortality, while the gods were immortal and could even be reincarnated after death. Meg deeply suspected that the continuous destruction of the Norland continent and the fall of the gods had a lot to do with the Undying. In this life, the gods had been reincarnated. The sea god and the goddess of life had successfully reincarnated. The Undying could not wait to start a new round of god hunt. If the Undying were allowed to act, the Norland continent would probably fall into a chaotic war again, and the gods would fall again. This is difficult. Meg sighed in his heart. The Undying had 10 Hall Masters, and all of them were transcendents. There were even more than 50 half-step transcendents. As for how many half-step transcendents they had, even the system did not have accurate data on that. They did not even need the underground city's army to be mobilized. If the Undying came out in full force, it would be enough to destroy the Norland continent. The gap between the 2 realms was so despairing. This was probably why Ferdinand dared to let him enter the underground city and even give him a chance to comprehend the divine tablet. So what if he became a god? There was only one god on the Norland continent. How could he resist the million-strong underground city's army? Not long after, the battleship landed and stopped. She accompanied Counselor Tam down the battleship. "The Marshal wants to speak to you." 10 minutes later, she returned to the battleship and contacted Ferdinand. "Not bad. You have completed the mission perfectly. I am very relieved that Counselor Tam can return safely," Ferdinand said to Meg with a look of admiration. "The mission is completed. When will the reward be given out?" Meg asked directly. "I have already arranged it. She will tell you what to do. I look forward to your performance in the next mission." Ferdinand ended the call with a smile. Meg looked at She. "This is your new identity. Tomorrow, the outstanding representatives from various places will go to the world of the Divine Tablet to comprehend it. You will enter with this identity." She handed a new bracelet to Meg. "Local representatives. What about this person?" Meg took the bracelet and frowned slightly. "This guy is a local tyrant. He is unreasonable and has killed many people. He got this spot by sucking up to the rich and powerful. He was hacked to death on the road. Isn't it reasonable for him to impersonate someone else?" "It is quite reasonable." Meg nodded. "Moreover, this would completely remove the military from the picture. Even if something happened to him in the world of the Divine Tablet, it would not implicate the military. After leaving the military, I will send you to this hotel. Tomorrow, you will enter with the representative team." She looked at Meg and said with a serious expression, "Remember the things to take note of when comprehending the Divine Tablet. Don't try to do anything to the Divine Tablet. You must know that there are countless high-level formations in the world of the Divine Tablet. There are also 3 extraordinary powerhouses guarding it. Once you violate the rules, you will be killed on the spot." "I understand." Meg nodded. He knew these things better than she, including which formations were set up. After completing the first dungeon mission, Meg received a chance to comprehend the Divine Tablet. It sounded like a very high-level reward. However, when he found out that a country bumpkin could get such a chance to comprehend the Divine Tablet by sucking up to the rich and powerful, his expectations were not too high. Of course, things like opportunities were hard to grasp. Every transcendent in the underground city would have a vigorous journey to comprehend the divine monolith on their path to godhood. She drove Meg out of the military and went straight to the hotel where the representative team was staying. Meg changed his appearance and swaggered into the hotel with a new bracelet. In the hotel room, Meg turned on the jamming device that she gave him before taking a shower and lying comfortably on the bed. It had been 5 days since this trip to the dungeon. Fortunately, he completed the first mission with the help of the system. After comprehending the Divine Tablet tomorrow, whether he succeeded or not, he would have to return to the Norland continent. After being away for so many days, he missed his wife, children, and the warm bed at home. He had a rough idea of the dungeon, and the more he thought about the difference between the 2 worlds, the more shocked he became. With the reincarnation of the gods and the guidance of the immortals, the collision between the 2 worlds was inevitable. Although Ferdinand wanted to eliminate the corporations, he was ultimately weak. Even the military might not be united, so he was not an ally that could be counted on. Meg even thought of a way out. If the 2 worlds went to war, he would send Amy and the rest to the moon first, then destroy the teleportation portal to sever the connection between the 2 worlds. He even wondered if the teleportation portal that was destroyed in the Moon Nation was the result of the previous underground invasion that led to the disconnection of the Moon Nation. "He actually blacklisted me." Norma looked at the red exclamation mark on the chat interface. After being stunned for a while, she said angrily, "There's no man in this world who can blacklist me. I'm going to ask him face to face." "Miss, there might be some misunderstanding." The little maid followed behind Norma, who rushed out, trying to calm her down. "Humph, he better explain himself clearly, or else." "Humph." Norma got into the car and went straight to the chef's dormitory. After ringing the doorbell for a long time, there was no response. Norma knocked on the door and shouted outside, "Hades, come out. Come out." The room was still quiet. A chef from the dormitory next door opened the door and came out to take a look. When he saw Miss Norma, he quickly closed the door and pretended not to see. Not long after, Boson arrived and said with a smile, "Miss Norma, Mr. Hades was invited by Miss Nancy to prepare the banquet. He's not in the dormitory. Taken away by Nancy." Norma's eyes turned cold. "No wonder he blacklisted me. He's prepared to be Nancy's loyal dog wholeheartedly. Humph, I'd like to see where Nancy can hide you." "Where's Nancy?" Norma looked at Boson and asked. "Miss Nancy, she." Boson was bitter. Miss Nancy asked him to secretly look for Hades, and here he had to keep Miss Norma in check. He was stuck in the middle and was in a dilemma. Hades, on the other hand, was happy to leave. "No need to say anything. I know where she is." Norma turned and went downstairs, heading straight for Nancy's villa. Nancy was about to get into the flying car when Norma stood in front of the car with her hands on her hips. "Where did you hide Hades? What do you care?" Nancy said with a cold face. She was angry that Norma forced Hades to leave, and this girl still dared to block her. "You're going to elope with him, aren't you?" Norma rolled her eyes and rushed forward to open the car door. There was no one else in the car. "I'm in a bad mood today. If you provoke me again, don't blame me for being rude to you." A ruler appeared in Nancy's hand as she looked at Norma coldly. Feeling the murderous intent in Nancy's eyes and looking at the ruler in her hand, Norma's momentum suddenly weakened. She closed the car door and took 2 steps back. She was still unforgiving. "Why are you so fierce? I'm telling you, you can't hide. I'll definitely find him and settle the score." Nancy got into the car with a cold face and stepped on the accelerator. The silver flying car disappeared into the sky. "Fierce woman, you can't get married for the rest of your life." Norma made a face at the sky and frowned as she looked at the villa. She resisted the urge to go in and search for Hades. Nancy was not stupid. She wouldn't hide a cook in the villa. Then where could he be? "Find out where he is now." Norma ordered the little maid. Strange, how did the military find that secret stronghold? They could even rescue him in such a short time. "Big Brother, the immortals suspect that we leaked the information. How should we deal with it?" "Humph, what does this have to do with us? Go personally and find out what went wrong. Don't let this matter affect our family." "Okay, I'll go now." Gardner hurriedly left McCarthy Manor. The military immediately broadcasted a news report. Councilman Tam, who was kidnapped on the street 10 days ago, was successfully rescued. This incident was suspected to be related to the mysterious organization, the Immortals. This news caused quite a commotion and shook all the major corporations. This was the first time the military classified the Immortals as a violent organization. Although they were careful with their words, they had already expressed their attitude. The next morning, Meg followed the representative team on a large flying car and headed to the world of the Divine Monument. The Divine Monument's descent allowed the underground city to quickly break away from barbarism and enter a civilized society. It then climbed the technological tree and became the current advanced civilization. It could be said that the Divine Monument was the core of the underground world. It was also the creator. Therefore, although the various forces in the underground city were at odds with each other, they were completely united in protecting the Divine Monument. For tens of thousands of years, the laws that flowed out of the Divine Monument had built a misty world of the Divine Monument around the Divine Monument. It was shrouded in clouds and mist. From the outside, it looked like a fairyland. And within 30 kilometers of the divine monument, no floating castles were allowed to exist in the sky. Therefore, standing in the center of Tucker City, this divine monument that was 9,000 meters tall appeared incomparably huge. What did 9,000 meters mean? Meg had once climbed the 828-meter Burj Khalifa, and this divine monument was even taller than 10 Burj Khalifa towers stacked together. Of course, if it was not eye-catching enough, when this divine monument fell from the sky, it would have been ignored and the story would have ended there. Meg followed in the middle of the team and looked inconspicuous. He took a breath of ethereal air, then swiped his bracelet and entered the entrance passage that was shrouded in clouds and mist. The passageway seemed to be very long, but when one stepped into it, they would enter another space. The space inside was much larger than the clouds and mist they saw from the outside. Mysterious. Meg praised in his heart and subconsciously looked up. The huge stone monument towered between heaven and earth, making people feel small. It was like gold and stone, and quaint inscriptions lingered on it. Then, he was stunned. Fuck! He could not help but exclaim. On the divine monument, there were words written in Chinese since ancient times, who preached the Tao. Up and down are not formed, why? Chapter 2485. Golden Chinese characters were engraved on the divine stele. Rays of light shone down from somewhere, illuminating the lines of Chinese characters. Mag was completely dumbfounded. This was the underground city. This was the divine object that the underground city saw as the source of the law. The words engraved on it were actually Chinese characters. Furthermore, these were not the ancient traditional Chinese characters, but simplified Chinese characters, which is what you are seeing now. Heaven's Inquisition was a long poem written by Chu Yuan. The entire poem was engraved on the divine monument, and it was placed at the most eye-catching spot in the middle of the monument. Other than Heaven's Inquisition, Meg searched up and down. He saw many famous ancient and modern texts, formulas, theorems, music. Everything was included. It could be said to be a vast history of civilization. And among them, Meg saw a big country with a long history. It crossed a long time, and with the year of Gingzi as the boundary, it rose from the blue planet and conquered the sea of stars. Wait, this was not important. The important thing was, why did it appear here? I have only transmigrated to this world for a year, but this divine monument has appeared in this world for at least 30,000 years. The timeline does not match. Meg was sure that this divine monument should have come from Earth, and it was the Earth that he grew up on. The system was silent for a long time before it said softly, "Holy shit." However, it quickly gave its own deduction. The heavenly axiom took your soul out and threw it into any node in the long river of time. So, you thought that you had just transmigrated from Earth, but you might have transmigrated to the Norland continent at this time node 50,000 years from Earth. And in these 20,000 years, China's national luck was off the charts. The blue planet rose, and they swept the sea of stars. In order to display their national power and educate everyone, they launched countless Heaven's Inquisition divine monuments. Isn't it very reasonable? Meg was silent for a long time. It did sound very reasonable. When he transmigrated, China seemed to have just launched Heaven's Inquisition 1. Good Lord, after conquering the Sea of Stars, they started to retro. Or was it a continuation? Across countless stars and tens of thousands of years, Meg's eyes were still wet as he looked at the divine monument full of Chinese characters in front of him. A sense of pride arose spontaneously. No matter what, I was born in China and grew up under the red flag. I'm proud. While sighing, Meg couldn't help but be curious. How should one operate the stone tablets' laws? To the residents of the underground city, these words were no different from a heavenly book. But he was different. Although there were some articles, poems, formulas, and theorems that he did not understand, there was no problem for him to read through them. There were even some ancient poems that he was familiar with. This wasn't a world where scholars were eloquent and poems could kill people. However, when Meg took a closer look, he could see that there were laws circulating around the divine monument. It was as if they had formed some sort of cycle with the divine monument, growing and multiplying endlessly. However, Meg glanced left and right at the representatives who had entered the world of the divine monument with him. They looked at the divine monument with a confused expression, as if they were trying their best to understand something, but to no avail. According to the rules, once one entered the divine monument world, the comprehension would begin. Other than not being allowed to disturb others and leaving on time, there were no other rules or restrictions. Meg suppressed the agitation in his heart, and sat cross-legged on the best spot in front of the divine monument. He focused on the laws circulating on the divine monument. As a demigod powerhouse, he was naturally familiar with laws. The underground city and the Norland continent had something in common. If one wanted to break through to the god or transcendence realm, one had to completely master a type of law. A 10th-tier powerhouse could master a type of law, so they could set up a law barrier. Meanwhile, a demigod could use laws in battle techniques, and not be restricted by law barriers. Hence, they had strong mobility and advantages in battle, and could crush 10th-tier powerhouses. Meanwhile, a transcendence realm had absolute control over laws. They could integrate the laws into their body, and their body would become a part of the laws. Hence, their lifespan would be greatly extended. Hence, above the 10th tier, what was important was the ability to comprehend laws. It wasn't something that could be made up for by hard work. Meg stared at the laws on the divine monument for a long time. They swam around like dragons, and he was dazzled. However, he still couldn't figure out anything. An hour later, Meg's eyes suddenly lit up, and he revealed a look of enlightenment. After failing to decipher the fancy and irregular laws countless times, Meg stared at a single law for a long time, and finally found a wonderful pattern. The flow of laws on the divine monument didn't seem to have any pattern, but it always revolved around a certain paragraph of text. It was as if that paragraph of text was produced by that paragraph of text. Meg then observed it carefully again. The movement of several laws confirmed his thoughts. These laws were indeed flowing around a certain paragraph of text. And on this divine monument, the one with the most number of laws and the most terrifying power was the long poem, Heavenly Questioning. I can't solve it by reading. Do I need to chant? Meg pondered, and then tried to recite it in Mandarin, since ancient times, who preached the Tao. As soon as he said that, a cloud of white fog suddenly appeared around Meg and shrouded him. On the divine monument, countless laws went berserk, and the speed of their flow suddenly accelerated countless times. Suddenly, it was too much for the eyes to take in. What's going on? Do I really have to use Mandarin to unlock it? Meg saw this strange change and was also shocked. However, seeing the strange phenomenon on the divine monument, he naturally couldn't stop there. He continued to recite, up and down are not formed, how can I test it? The underworld is bright and dark, who can reach the extreme? Feng Yi is just an image, how can he know? He was clearly hiding it, so why did he do it? As Mag recited the Heavenly Inquisition, in a loud voice, the divine monument began to transform. Countless laws of nature emerged from the monument and transformed into a 5-clawed golden dragon in mid-air before pouncing down toward Mag. A terrifying pressure instantly suppressed Meg, and the sharp dragon claws shone with a cold light, as if it wanted Meg to submit to it. Kneeling down and submitting, could he become a god? Meg kept reciting, but looking at the 5-clawed golden dragon, he narrowed his eyes slightly. In addition to the terrifying pressure of the five-clawed golden dragon, there was also a voice of desire in his heart. Kneel down and submit, and he would obtain the power of the five-clawed golden dragon. Just as the five-clawed golden dragon came close, and the fifth claw under its abdomen was about to grab Meg's head, a black heavy sword appeared in Meg's hand. He flipped his body, stepped on the back of the five-clawed golden dragon, and stabbed it down. The five-clawed golden dragon instantly collapsed and turned back into countless laws, and rushed toward Meg's body. Meg only felt that his body was in a cycle of being filled, bursting, healing, being filled again, and bursting again. He couldn't extricate himself. The countless laws on the divine monument stopped circulating at this moment. Strands of origin energy overflowed from the divine monument and started to rush toward Meg. The strange movement of the divine monument also caused the world of the divine monument and the entire underground world to react. A vortex suddenly appeared in the sky above the divine monument, and countless spiritual energy and laws of heaven and earth were forcefully sucked into the monument. The sky changed color, and the world dimmed, as if it was the end of the world. What's going on? The three transcendent experts guarding this place entered the world of the divine monument almost at the same time. They looked at the seven-colored light flowing on the stone monument, as well as the strands of origin of laws that were seeping out. Their eyes were filled with greed. Back then, when they broke through to transcendence, they guided a strand of origin energy from the divine monument into their bodies and turned it into a seed. Then, they carefully watered it with the power of laws, and finally fused it into one to become a transcendence. To be recognized by the divine monument and obtain a strand of origin energy from the laws was already a great opportunity. At this moment, the divine monument was overflowing with countless origin energy from the laws, as if it was ready to be harvested. To transcendence, it was also a fatal attraction. Almost at the same time, all the transcendents in the underground world sensed it. Regardless of whether they were in seclusion or enjoying themselves, all of them put aside their work and rushed toward the divine monument. After becoming a transcendence, no one knew if there was a future. However, if transcendents wanted to increase their strength, the only way was to strengthen the origin energy in their bodies. The overflowing origin energy from the divine monument was tantamount to a great opportunity for transcendence. The first to arrive outside the divine monument were three black-robed men wearing golden masks. A cold aura enveloped them, and the people around them automatically retreated a few hundred meters, looking at them with awe and fear. The Immortals, this mysterious and powerful organization, entered the eyes of ordinary people with a military announcement. These three mysterious men wearing golden masks were 3 of the 10 temple masters of the Immortals, but no one knew who they were. However, no matter who they were, their status as temple masters meant that their strength had reached the transcendence realm, and they were the true top masters of the underground world. Outside the scene, there were already tens of thousands of onlookers. At this moment, seeing the arrival of transcendence, they understood that there was indeed a change in the divine monument that attracted 3 transcendents. Big brother, the overflowing origin energy is indeed strange, but this thing is of great benefit to us. Even if we only absorb one strand, we might be able to control the second principle, the skinny black-robed man on the left said. That's right, big brother. Let's take advantage of the fact that those old guys haven't arrived yet. Otherwise, when there are too many people, it will be difficult to make a move, the tall and fat black-robed man on the right agreed. The black-robed man in the middle raised his head and looked into the distance, saying in a deep voice, "They are already here." As soon as his voice fell, a light spot lit up in the sky, and several figures with extremely powerful auras appeared, arriving in front of the divine monument in the blink of an eye. These people were the 3 transcendents of the Dixon family. They exchanged a glance with the black-robed man, then looked away without any communication. Immediately after, the transcendents of the 10 major families all arrived, surrounding the divine monument, and did not act rashly. For tens of thousands of years, the divine monument has never had such a change. I wonder what the reason is. An old man frowned and said, "The divine monument is changing. I'm afraid that someone is about to enter the Transcendence realm." You and I both entered the Transcendence realm under the divine monument. Did we see any changes in the divine monument that day? Could it be that some incredible divine object is about to be born? This scene can only be compared to the records on the day of the divine monument's descent. The various transcendents discussed animatedly, all of them believing that this matter was quite strange. Why is there such a sudden change? Could it be related to Meg? Ferdinand had arrived at some point, standing in a corner, accompanied by two transcendents from the military. The military was not far from here, and because Meg was comprehending the divine monument today, he paid more attention to this place, so he immediately rushed over as soon as the change occurred. Back then, when he broke through to the Transcendence realm, he also caused a small resonance with the divine monument, but it was only a brief glow on the divine monument. Today's change, which caused the world to change color, was indeed not recorded in the history books. Those who entered today were representatives from various places, and there were no talented people, and there were only 3 10th-level powerhouses. Ferdinand could only think of Meg as the only one who could cause such a change in the divine monument. However, he did not know what he had done to cause such a huge commotion. There were already more than 30 transcendents present, and it was likely that all the transcendents in Tucker City had already arrived. "Let's go, let's take a step first," the Lord Hallmaster ordered, and the 3 immortal Hallmasters entered the divine monument realm at the same time. When the other transcendents saw this, they also rushed to enter the divine monument realm, fearing that they would fall behind and lose the opportunity. As soon as they entered the divine monument realm, the transcendents who were originally floating in the air were suppressed and fell to the ground. A terrifying pressure that they had never experienced before came down from the divine monument, suppressing the entire divine monument realm. At this time, the local representatives who entered the divine monument realm first were all lying on the ground, their faces full of horror, unable to move. Only the 3 transcendents who were guarding this place were sitting cross-legged 10 meters away from the divine monument, meditating with their eyes closed. A law was drawn out from the divine monument and entered between their eyebrows. The transcendents were very familiar with this posture. They were drawing the origin of the law into their bodies, intending to refine the second law. Today, the divine monument had a strange phenomenon, and the origin of the law was overflowing, which seemed to be easier to attract. This was a great opportunity. After the transcendents entered the realm, they all sat down cross-legged and began to draw the law into their bodies to refine their second law. The Lord Hallmaster of the Immortal Hallmaster glanced at the transcendents who were beginning to draw the law into their bodies. His gaze moved up and fell on a certain spot in the void, which seemed to be the end of the vortex and the source of the strange phenomenon. The transcendents carefully drew the origin of the law into their bodies, but somewhere in the void, there were countless origin of the law rushing there. Even an existence like him who had been in the transcendence realm for more than 10,000 years felt fear when he sensed the terrifying origin of the law. After fear, there was great greed. In the past 10,000 years, he had nurtured the 4th law origin, but there was still an indelible gap between him and the legendary realm of immortality and indestructibility. But in this strange phenomenon, he saw an opportunity. If he could replace the guy in the void and draw the power of the law into his body, he would achieve a true law, true body, and he would reach the realm of immortality and indestructibility. A black shuttle appeared, alternating between light and dark in the void, with 4 different laws revolving around it. Let me see who exactly caused such a phenomenon. I'm definitely going to seize this luck. The Lord Hallmaster pointed with his right hand, and the black shuttle pierced through the void, tearing through the fog and the law, and piercing into the void. Bang. The black shuttle that pierced through the clouds seemed to have hit something hard, making a dull sound. The law shook slightly, but it soon disappeared without a sound. At this time, Meg, who was surrounded by the fog, opened his eyes and looked at the black shuttle that stopped 10 centimeters in front of his forehead. He breathed a sigh of relief. If it were not for the law automatically protecting him, he would not have been able to withstand the full blow of this peak transcendent realm master. Old dog, you dare to use a sneak attack. When this young master becomes a god, he will kill you first. Meg lowered his head and glanced at the golden-masked black-robed man on the ground. The immortal hallmaster had come knocking on his door. As the principal sources continued to enter his body, Meg's body underwent countless reconstructions. At this moment, almost every inch of his flesh and skin was reshaped by the law, becoming a vessel that could better accommodate the law. In other words, he had become a part of the law. This process was extremely painful, but he could clearly feel that his control and understanding of the law was rapidly improving, including the laws that he did not understand at all. It was like Su Zhu, who had obtained 60 years of cultivation from the heavenly mountain maiden. He did not need to work hard, he just needed to endure. This feeling was great. China's cheats were in their accounts, and they were simply flying in the sky. Ha! The Lord Hallmaster clearly felt that the shuttle had hit something, but the fog had not dissipated, and he had lost contact with the shuttle. He could not help but be shocked. This shuttle was his life source artifact, and it could break through the void and nothing could stop it. The Lord Hallmaster's old face under the mask was gloomy. He had lived for more than 10,000 years, and his vitality was already insufficient. Even if he could live for another 1,000 years, it would be difficult for him to become immortal. If he missed this opportunity, he was afraid that he would not have another chance in the future. After an internal struggle, a cold glint flashed in his eyes, and he made up his mind. His black robe fluttered as he resisted the pressure of the divine monument and slowly rose into the sky, flying toward the center of the vortex. Xianming, this old fellow, is he trying to snatch providence? Ferdinand was not in a hurry to guide the law into his body, so he was the only extraordinary present who saw the Lord Hallmaster's movements. Furthermore, he had already confirmed that Mag was the only one missing after entering the venue. It seemed like Mag was indeed the one who caused this anomaly. This was his first time comprehending the divine monument, and he had caused such an unprecedented phenomenon. Meg's talent could be said to be extraordinary. Could he be the chosen one? After thinking about it, Ferdinand did not make a move in the end. He quietly watched Xianming rise into the sky and fly toward the most violent core of the law. Among the extraordinary in the underground city, Xianming was the most mysterious. No one even knew how long he had lived, but his strength was definitely among the strongest. Previously, when he made a move, he had already controlled 4 laws. Most of the extraordinary present were wild with joy because they had obtained the second law origin. The immortal was Ferdinand's greatest worry. If he could use the divine monument to get rid of Xianming, the pressure on the 10 consortiums would be greatly reduced. Xianming rose into the sky and entered the violent area of the law. Countless laws penetrated his black robe and entered his body. The golden mask exploded, revealing an old, ghostly face. 2 balls of green flames lit up in the depths of his eyes like a skeleton's. Xianming let out a tragic howl, but he did not explode from the law. His body turned into a vortex and started to plunder the law origin that overflowed from the divine monument. As the law origin entered his body, Xianming's old appearance started to become younger at a speed visible to the naked eye. His flesh and blood were replenished, and his aura rose steadily. Old fellow, you're quite something. Meg glanced at Xianming. Then, his gaze landed on the essay at the top of the divine monument. He recited, "The Tao can be said, the extraordinary Tao. The name can be named, the extraordinary name." As soon as he said that, the divine monument world shook again. Heavenly music played. Golden lotuses grew under Meg's feet as he climbed up the divine monument. Lotuses bloomed with every step he took. Xianming's eyes shone with a strange light. He saw through the fog and saw this mysterious scene. He wanted to go higher and plunder more providence, but his aura was locked, and he could not ascend anymore. Meg recited the Tao Te Ching. Lotuses bloomed with every step he took. With every step he took, the law that entered his body would automatically circulate one cycle, cleansing his body and turning it into his own use. He was no longer just a vessel. 9,000 steps to the top of the divine monument. At this moment, the law had circulated 9,000 cycles in his body. His physical body had become transparent. Countless laws were operating within it, making him look like a god. Boom! At this moment, a purple lightning tribulation descended from the sky and struck Meg's head. The lightning tribulation flooded his head and drowned him. After a long while, the tribulation clouds dissipated, and the vortex in the sky disappeared. Meg, wearing the golden dragon armor, stood 9,000 meters in the sky and opened his eyes. Two golden lights pierced through the three realms as if they could see through heaven and earth. On this day, Meg killed the golden dragon and obtained the fortune of the divine monument. He entered the immortal state. Meg had an epiphany, and put on the mask for himself. Congratulations, host, for completing the God of Cooking trial and becoming the God of Cooking. You have obtained the ultimate gift package, Manchuhan Imperial Feast Recipe. All permissions of the restaurant have been unlocked. At this moment, the system's excited voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind, as well as the crappy fireworks special effects. God of Cooking. Is there a mistake? Meg raised his eyebrows. He felt that the system was rubbing against him. It's impossible to become a god through the Tao of Cooking. You're a chef, and you've become a god. So, you're the God of Cooking. It's completely reasonable. The system said righteously. Meg thought about it carefully. It made sense. Anyway, he just had to keep the gift package. Amy had talked about the Manchuhan Imperial Feast many times. The fog around the divine monument realm dissipated. The laws overflowing from the divine monument were instantly restrained. All the transcendents who were in the midst of enlightenment were interrupted. No! Xianming let out an angry roar, but he couldn't stop the laws that were being withdrawn. The world was clear. Everyone's gaze instinctively looked toward the figure in golden armor 9,000 meters in the sky. Ordinary people couldn't see anything, but transcendents could see everything clearly. It's him. That kid from the Norland continent. Xianming said in shock and anger. That man in golden armor was wearing a black and white mask, so his face couldn't be seen clearly. However, because of that mask, Xianming recognized him at a glance. It was the kid who spoiled the Immortals' plans on the Norland continent. How did this kid enter the underground city? How could he absorb such a terrifying origin of laws? The third and fifth palace masters were also shocked and angry. The conversation between the three immortals was also heard by the other transcendents. The Norland continent was adjacent to the underground city. Due to the lack of resources, it had never been valued. However, there was a young half-step transcendence on the Norland continent recently. This matter had been circulating, but these transcendents didn't take it to heart. However, the person who caused such a terrifying change in the divine monument today and absorbed such a huge amount of origin of laws was actually from the Norland continent. This matter could be said to be like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples among the transcendents. Entering the transcendence realm in one day, as expected of him. I just don't know if this is good or bad for the underground city. Ferdinand looked at Meg with a heavy expression. This change was already beyond his control. He actually entered the Transcendence realm. She held the binoculars and looked at the masked man in golden armor in the sky. He was dumbfounded. Kill him while he has just entered the Transcendence realm. Murderous intent surged in Xianming's eyes. With an order, he had already broken through the sky and rushed toward Meg in the sky. Murderous intent also flashed in the eyes of the other two immortals when they heard that. They rose together and prepared to join forces to kill Meg, who had just entered the Transcendence realm. Meg looked at the three black-robed men who were approaching him rapidly below, and a mocking smile appeared on his face under the mask. Since he had become a god, he naturally had to have a suitable divine weapon. Meg extended his hand toward the divine monument. The divine monument began to shake violently, and a crack appeared at the top. A silver longsword flew out from the divine monument. The sword was 3 feet long and sharp. The laws revolved around it, and the two words, Heaven's Inquisition, were engraved on the sword hilt. Thank you for your gift, old ancestor. Meg thanked him in his heart. With the sword in hand, the laws were connected as if they were one. At the same time, the 3 figures below had already arrived in front of him. Xianming looked at the sword in Meg's hand with greed in his eyes. If he could control such a divine weapon, he would be invincible in the world. A dark flying shuttle broke through the void and suddenly appeared behind Meg's head. The dark laws revolved around it, and the dark corrosive aura seemed to be able to melt space. Meg didn't look back, but when the flying shuttle was 10 centimeters away from the back of his head, it stopped abruptly and couldn't move forward anymore. How is this possible? Xianming was shocked. He had absorbed a large amount of law origin earlier, and his strength had increased greatly. He was already about to transcend transcendence. But at this moment, his laws were absolutely suppressed. The other two black-robed men also attacked at the same time. The black hole in the void was annihilated silently under Meg's feet, and the meteors exploded into gorgeous fireworks above Meg's head. They couldn't get close to him at all. We have always convinced people with reason. You can learn what we give you, but you can't say it's yours by force, and you can't use your ancestors' things to beat your ancestor. Meg slowly raised the sword in his hand, and pointed it at Xianming. He loudly said, "The immortal wreaked havoc on the Norland continent and killed the Elven Queen. Today, I will destroy you. Everyone, take this as a warning." Meg's voice reverberated around the divine monument realm, and it was enough for all the transcendents present to hear. The 3 transcendents joined forces, but they couldn't hurt Meg at all. All the transcendents' expressions changed drastically, and when they heard that, they were even more shocked. Go! Xianming's expression changed drastically. With a command, he actually split into 3, and 3 into 9, and fled in all directions. The other 2 lords saw Xianming fleeing, and their faces turned pale instantly. They hurriedly used their ultimate escape skills. One of them escaped into the void, and the other directly teleported on the spot. Trying to run. The heaven-seeking sword in Meg's hand disappeared, and turned into a white rainbow. It instantly pierced through the 9 silhouettes, and then pierced Xianming, who was hiding in the void, and nailed him to the divine monument. After that, Meg smashed his fist into the void, and the 3rd lord, who escaped into the void, fell out. He was squashed into a meat patty, and fell to the ground. The heaven-seeking sword disappeared again. Dozens of miles away, on the top floor of the Twin Towers building, a figure stepped out of the teleportation array, and was pierced through. He fell to the ground with his eyes wide open. The heaven-seeking sword returned to Meg's hand. It was sharp, and there was no trace of blood. Meg took a step forward, and disappeared from Tucker City. On this day, the Immortal's 10th Lord died, and 50 half-step transcendents were all dead. All the secret bases were uprooted, and tens of thousands of cult members were scattered. There were no more dead people in the underground city. Below the divine monument, everyone looked at the two corpses on the ground in shock. A guy who had just entered the Transcendent Realm had killed 3 veteran Transcendent powerhouses as easily as crushing ants. Such strength and methods made even those who had entered the Transcendent Realm tremble with fear. Without a doubt, if they were the ones who went up, they wouldn't be able to withstand this sword either. That person's warning from before was still lingering in their ears, causing chaos on the Norland continent, and wanting to destroy the immortal. What arrogant words, but it was also terrifying. All the Transcendents left hurriedly, and returned to their respective homes to guard their families. I'm afraid this kid will become the biggest disaster in the underground city. I was too reckless. Ferdinand got into the military vehicle with a grave expression, and returned to the military. What is he going to do after destroying the immortal? She also had a grave expression. Meg, who had become a god, seemed to have become distant and unfamiliar to her all of a sudden. It was impossible to get close to him. Very soon, the news of the immortal's destruction reached the ears of the 10 consortiums. Such a large organization with tens of thousands of years of intertwined forces, the 10 Transcendents, countless half-step Transcendents, and 10th-tier powerhouses were completely destroyed. Not a single secret hideout was left. Everyone in the consortiums was in danger. They activated their family's protective spell formation, and all the powerhouses returned to their families to guard. Just as everyone was guessing who Meg was going to target next, he returned to Tucker City, and released the news for the spokespersons of the various consortiums to head to the Twin Towers building for negotiations. Akali had just gotten people to move the dead body of the 3rd Palace Master away. She was cursing her bad luck when she saw a golden figure descend from the sky and land on the balcony. Akali's mouth and eyes were wide open, showing the fear in her heart at that moment. Previously, the elders in the family had already released the news for all the clansmen to avoid this extremely dangerous man in golden armor, and for the core members to return to the family immediately. She stayed here because she was somewhat lucky and had reverse psychology. If that terrifying powerhouse from the Norland continent really wanted to destroy the Dixon family, she would be safe hiding here. But she never would have thought that this man didn't go to the Dixon Manor, but rather came to her Twin Towers building. Meg looked at the woman in front of him. Her hair was still half dry, and she was wearing a bathrobe, as if she had just come out of the bath. Her face was flushed, and the loose bathrobe couldn't hide her graceful figure. Meg couldn't help finding her shocked expression and the fear in her beautiful eyes a little funny. Back then on the micro-platform, she kept calling him good big brother, and it was very intimate. She would tease him from time to time, and even wanted to keep him. Why was it that after seeing him, she was afraid? He had killed too many people, so he was a little tired. Meg sat down on a chair on the side and looked at Akali as he said, "Dance for me." Akali was stunned. She swallowed the words that were at the tip of her tongue back down. As for the thoughts of sacrificing her body and exchanging her chastity for her little life, she also suppressed them. This god that could casually kill an undying and kill over 10 transcendents with his sword actually wanted to see her dance. But she didn't know how to dance. No, at this time, she had to dance even if she didn't. Behind Akali, the maids and the guards responsible for protecting her were also filled with fear. They wanted to move forward, but they couldn't move from the terrifying pressure. "You can all go down and leave the top floor." Akali gave the order. Of the guards here, the strongest was only a half-step transcendent. They would be killed with a single stare. Although the guards had hesitant looks, they still listened to Akali's orders and left the top floor. Akali calmed herself down and revealed a smile that wasn't too forced. She looked at Meg and said, "I don't know how to dance, so how about I do a striptease for you?" This time it was Meg's turn to be stunned. He had seen too much blood and wanted to see something fresh to wash his eyes, calming himself down before the negotiations with the large corporations. He never thought that a collie would want to perform a striptease. "Ah. Begin," Meg coldly said. A collie softly bit her lip as her face turned red. She thought that Meg would reject her and have her perform something else, but she never thought that he wouldn't be so pretentious. But she had already said this and she really didn't know how to dance. In order to keep her little life, wasn't it just a striptease? Although she hadn't done it before, she had seen it quite a few times. A steel pipe rose from the ground and a collie looked at Meg with a bit of resentment in her eyes. She began to move her hands up and down the steel pipe, lowering her head. The buttons of the loose bathrobe were undone one by one and slid down her shoulders. There was also a flesh-colored gauze dress under the bathrobe. Her slender and full legs and her jade-like breasts were faintly discernible as they gently swayed. Meg sat up straight, seriously enjoying this performance. Half an hour passed in a flash. After receiving Meg's approval, a collie picked up the clothes on the ground with a red face and shamefully left. Meg adjusted his armor and stood at the edge of the balcony, overlooking the entire Tucker city. The towering city was more spectacular than any city he had seen before. Under the Twin Towers building, the representatives of the various large corporations were all present, including Ferdinand, who had come personally from the military. There was naturally no lack of meeting rooms in the Twin Towers building. Meg sat alone on one side, facing the representatives of the 10 large corporations, the military representative Ferdinand, and the president of the underground city. "I have already destroyed the Undying. You already know the reason, and you should also know the result." Meg looked at the people in front of him, and calmly said, "Today, I want to sign the Twin Towers Treaty with all of you. The content is very simple, there are only 2 terms. 1. Guarantee that the underground city will not launch any form of invasion on the Norland continent. 2. Guarantee the first with your lives." Meg's tone was very domineering, but the terms were out of everyone's expectations. After slaughtering the Undying and displaying battle power that was beyond the imagination of the underground city, the various large corporations were even mentally prepared to submit. In the end, this was it. To the underground city, the Norland continent was originally a barren land. For the past tens of thousands of years, they had always had an absolute advantage over the Norland continent in terms of battle power, but they had never launched a large-scale invasion on the Norland continent. The 2 terms that Meg proposed did not cause any loss to the various large corporations. Ferdinand also had a look of surprise on his face. Meg's method of wiping out the Undying could be said to be domineering and ruthless. It was enough to make the various large corporations tremble in fear. At this time, even if Meg proposed to be the president, they would probably have to consider letting Mr. President abdicate his position. However, Meg did not want anything. He only requested that the underground city would never launch an invasion on the Norland continent. He wanted 1 man and 1 sword to guard 1 realm. At this moment, he even felt some respect for Meg in his heart. This young man had a vision that exceeded everyone's thinking, and a complete disdain for power. The signing of the Twin Towers Treaty went very smoothly. The representatives of all parties did not have any objections, and signed the contract readily, and pressed their blood seals. This was a binding contract. Everyone present was very sure of this. "I'm still very young, and can still live for a long time. I hope I can see all of you die of old age." Meg kept the contract, and sent his blessings to the representatives present. The big shots of the various large families were all smiling, but they were cursing in their hearts. Meg got up and left. 10 minutes later, in an abandoned building. Ferdinand looked at Meg, who had changed into casual clothes, with a complicated expression. "I don't know if the decision I made back then was right or wrong. If you didn't have the intention to invade the Norland continent from the beginning, then you should have made the right decision. At least I helped you eliminate the undying ones directly. The remaining corporations are just a plate of loose sand. Isn't it easier to deal with them? Meg said with a smile. Ferdinand nodded. From this perspective, it was indeed as Meg said. I'm preparing to return to the Norland continent today. From today onwards, your observer will be changed to the ambassador stationed in Norland. Also, I only recognize she, Meg said. All right. Ferdinand nodded. He had no objections to this. According to the previous treaty, he did not intend to send any more observers to the Norland continent. I'll get she to send you back, Ferdinand said before sending a message to she. Meg had no objections to this. He really did not know how to go back. He could not possibly poke a hole in the sky and go back, right? Ferdinand left. Not long after, a familiar flying car stopped outside the small building. Meg boarded the car familiarly. He looked at she, who had a cold expression, and said with a smile, "Why? It's only been half a day, and you don't recognize me anymore." She's expression relaxed as if a rock had been lifted from his heart. He glanced at Meg. His aura was restrained, and he did not seem any different from yesterday. However, it was this man in front of him who became a god under the divine monument, killed 10 extraordinary powerhouses, eliminated the undying ones, and signed the Twin Towers Treaty. It was no different from killing. Are we returning to the Norland continent now? She asked. No, I want to bring them some local specialties, Meg said with a smile. This time, she did not reject him. He brought Meg straight to the trade building. Meg took the money he got from the Undying One's vault, and bought, and bought. He filled up 3 spatial rings before returning with a full load. The flying car changed to a battleship, passed through the spatial node, and entered the Norland continent. Looking at the wild but familiar scenery below, Meg felt a sense of familiarity. He did not expect that the 6-day underground tour, which was originally just to take a look at that new world, would accidentally turn the world upside down. However, this would remove a huge threat to him and the Norland continent. Next, he would take his revenge. After getting rid of those old ones who were undying ones, he would be able to live a peaceful life of taking care of his wife and raising his daughter. The battleship hovered outside Chaos City. Meg took a step out, and appeared at Amy's door in the next instant. Sigh. When will Mr. Mac come back? I'm starving to death. Harrison grumbled as he chewed on the pancake in his hand and looked at the closed door of the restaurant. Ah. I'm too ashamed to see anyone now. I don't want to live anymore. On the top floor of the Twin Towers building, a collie buried her head in her blanket, feeling ashamed and furious. End of chapter. Chapter 2486. You've clearly gotten fatter. Didn't you say you were going to lose weight and get married? Meg said with a smile as he stood behind Harrison. Harrison, who was munching on a biscuit and mumbling softly, was stunned for a moment. He turned around at the same time with Georgina and looked at Meg in surprise. Mr. Mac, you're finally back. I missed you so much. Meg turned sideways to avoid the impact of Harrison's meatball. He had obviously gotten fatter after not seeing him for a few days. Harrison turned around and came back. He put down the biscuit in his hand embarrassedly, but he quickly said matter-of-factly, "You can't blame me. Georgina is pregnant, and she has a great appetite. I can't let her eat alone, can I?" Pregnant? Meg looked at Georgina's slightly protruding belly. Georgina blushed and hid behind Harrison embarrassedly. She covered her face and said, "It's only 2 months. Don't misunderstand. It's just meat, he looks like he's full term. Meg reached out and patted Harrison's round belly. Duong, 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 it made people want to ask, boss, is your melon guaranteed to be ripe? Georgina was shaking with laughter. Her face had become rounder, and the haze of anorexia had disappeared. She had the naivety that a girl her age should have. Harrison also smiled foolishly, and his eyes were full of love. Meg had always been a public display of affection. He couldn't stand such greasy public display of affection. He took out the key and was about to open the door. Boss Mag, are we opening for business today? Harrison came up to him with anticipation. It's not open today. Come tomorrow morning. I guarantee you can eat hot soup dumplings. Meg shook his head with a smile. Okay, then we'll come tomorrow. Although Harrison was a little disappointed, he still nodded and agreed. Goodbye, Mr. Mack. Georgina was carefully helped into the carriage by Harrison. She waved at Meg. Goodbye. Meg nodded with a smile. I think I heard Father's voice. A little girl with 2 braids poked her head out of the second-floor window of the magic potion shop next door. Then, she tried her best to poke half of her body out of the window and tilted her head to look in the direction of the restaurant. Amy's eyes suddenly lit up. She waved her little hands and shouted in surprise, Father! Father! Then, because his center of gravity was unstable, he fell head first. Aw! Ugh! Before she could scream, Amy had already fallen into a warm and firm embrace. Don't climb through the window, you'll fall. Meg hugged Amy and smiled as he pinched the little one's chubby cheeks. It's okay, I can fly. Amy fanned her little hands like a little bee. How can my daughter be so cute? Meg's father couldn't control his smile anymore. The corners of his mouth were about to reach his ears. Is school over? Meg glanced at the magic potion shop. It should be Julian's magic class today. There's still 15 minutes left. Amy glanced at her little genius electronic watch and shook her head dejectedly. She then pouted and rubbed her little tummy with an aggrieved expression. But Amy is so hungry. I want to eat Father's barbecue. The barbecue with a lot of chili. Make it for her immediately. Meg tried to control his emotions and asked, Didn't Sister Cece make you lunch today? She did. She made the super invincible green and healthy traditional druid delicacy, boiled leaves. Amy stretched out 3 fingers and said seriously, I ate 3 pieces. I really can't eat anymore. Meg couldn't control his smile anymore. He knew a little about Cece's cooking skills. It was okay when she cooked normally, but when it came to traditional druid delicacies, it was completely dark. Look at how wrong the child was. She was pouting so much that you could hang a bag on her mouth. Then. I'll make an exception today. Father will bring you home to skip class. Let's go home and make something delicious. Meg scratched Amy's little nose and carried her in the direction of the restaurant. Amy skipped class. Amy skipped class. Charcoal stuck his head out of the birdcage and yelled at the top of his voice. Stupid crow, be careful or I'll burn off your fur again. Amy turned around and glared at Charcoal. A ball of flame danced on his fingertips. No. This is a real fur coat that I just grew out. I need to keep it for winter. Charcoal shrank into a corner and shivered, bowing his head to the evil forces. Coward. Green Bean called out with some disdain. A round orange figure seemed to have been awakened by Green Bean's voice. It rushed out of the magic potion shop and circled around Meg eagerly. Then, it rubbed its big round face against Meg's calf with a fawning expression. Ugly duckling, eat at Big Sister Cece's house tonight. The druid's traditional feast suits you very well. Go home after you finish eating, Amy ordered seriously as she looked down at Ugly Duckling. Are you serious? Ugly Duckling lay on the ground with its eyes wide open and looked at Amy with an expression of disbelief. Mr. Mac, you're back. Cece walked to the door with a bottle of magic potion and looked at Meg in surprise. Yes, I just got home, and I miss my child. Can I get off school 15 minutes earlier today? Meg said with a smile. Little Amy was a little nervous, but she also looked at Cece expectantly. No problem. We've finished all the lessons for today anyway. Amy just needs to go back and practice hard. Cece nodded with a smile. Big sister Cece, I love you. Amy said to Cece in a daze, and her little face lit up immediately. Take care and rest. It seems like another little fellow is coming to this world soon. Meg looked at Cece's pregnant belly. The druid's pregnancy cycle was 6 months. Calculating the time, the little fellow should be born soon. Big sister Cece, take Ugly Duckling away and let it go after the diet meal, Amy said to Cece without turning back as Meg carried her away. Okay. Cece answered with a smile. She picked up the dumbfounded Ugly Duckling, and then carried it into the shop under its desperate gaze. She slammed the door and locked it from the inside. Humph, that's what it gets for stealing my snacks every day. Amy huffed through her nostrils. She was very happy that her revenge was successful. Meg pushed the door open and entered the restaurant. Although it hadn't been open for business for 6 days, the restaurant was still spotless. It was just a little quiet. Meg put Amy down and looked around. Where's Anne? Big sister Anne has gone to class. She's the art teacher of Hope School now. School should be over soon. Amy ran upstairs with her short little legs and brought a pair of slippers for Meg. Here, father. Change into the comfortable slippers. Meg's heart warmed. This was a considerate little girl. Amy, do you want to eat roast mutton or roast beef? Or roast pork belly? Meg asked as he walked towards the kitchen. I want all of them. Amy ran after him. I really want to eat all of them. Meg lowered his head and looked at the expectant little girl. He nodded and said, Okay, then I'll roast all of them for you. There were all kinds of fresh dishes provided by the system in the fridge. He put on an apron and treated and marinated the beef, mutton, and pork belly. After he was done with the preparations, Meg went upstairs to take a shower. He changed into a simple and fresh set of clothes and went downstairs. The meat was almost marinated, and the charcoal stove was also ready. It wasn't even 4:00 yet, and there were only the father and daughter in the restaurant. So Meg directly took a small grill and put it on the table to roast while eating. The pork belly was cut very thinly. As soon as it was put on the grill, it started to sizzle. Soon, the fat meat became transparent. He quickly brushed a thin layer of sauce on it, sprinkled some cumin and pepper powder, and immediately took it out of the pot and into the plate. Amy had already prepared the lettuce. She wrapped it in the lettuce, pulled out a bamboo skewer, and stacked 3 pieces of pork belly together. She put it into her mouth and bit into it. The sweet lettuce wrapped around the fragrant roasted pork belly. It was a perfect combination to enjoy a big mouthful of meat while also relieving grease. Of course, a layman like Meg didn't like to wrap lettuce. He liked to put the oily pork belly directly into his mouth. He loved the taste of the overflowing oil. It was fat but not greasy. This was the foundation of his roasted pork belly. Children would naturally have lighter tastes. After eating a few skewers of pork belly, the roasted beef cubes were also ready. He brushed 3 layers of spicy sauce and rolled it in the chili powder. Only then did it basically meet Amy's requirements of spicy roasted meat. Amy held the bamboo skewer with both hands like a little squirrel. She blew quickly in small mouthfuls, and then took a bite of the beef cubes. Her cheeks immediately puffed up, and then she chewed happily. "Father, you eat too." Amy handed the skewers in her hand to Meg. "Father isn't hungry." "Take your time, Amy. There's still a lot more. They're all yours." Meg looked at Amy dotingly. Speaking of which, many things had happened during this period. He was exhausted from dealing with them, and he had greatly lacked care and concern for Amy. Now that he had become a god, he should take more time to spend with his child after he settled the remaining matters. Just like that, one person roasted meat, and the other ate. The father and daughter were happy and harmonious. Then, the dining room door was pushed open. Irina stood at the dining room door with a motherly smile on her face, holding a roasted goose to take out. She looked at the father and daughter eating roasted meat and the bamboo skewers piled up into a small mountain at the side. Her delicate eyebrows stood up like two swords, and she said with some anger in her voice, "You're eating roasted meat behind my back." "Sigh, honey, listen to me." Meg hurriedly put down the skewers in his hand. Before he could argue, Irina had already closed the door, threw away the roasted goose in her hand, and sat down at the table. She took the roasted beef skewers from Amy with one hand and ordered, "Add another 50 beef skewers and 50 mutton skewers, and streaky pork." "Then I'll add another 100 streaky pork skewers." Meg wanted to say something, but he hesitated. In the end, he obediently went into the kitchen to prepare the meat skewers. Meg looked at Irina, who was enjoying the roasted meat, and asked, "Where's Yai?" "At the ice cream shop. Phyllis and the others are watching." Irina ate 5 roasted beef and mutton skewers in a row. Then, she took a big gulp of the cold beer that Meg poured for her. Only then did she look at Meg seriously. Suddenly, a look of disbelief appeared in her eyes, and her voice trembled slightly. "You've become a god." "Yes, I had some opportunities over there." Meg nodded with a smile, but he didn't say much in front of Amy. Irina's eyes glistened with tears, but she quickly returned to normal. She took the meat skewers from Meg's hand and fed them to him. "You eat some too." Yes. "Only when you're full will you have the strength to roast meat." Amy chewed on the mutton cubes and agreed. This meal of roasted meat took an hour, and the mother and daughter were full. Meg asked Amy to go to the ice cream shop and tell the girls that he was back and that he would be having dinner at the restaurant tonight. Amy wiped her mouth and was about to leave when and pushed the door open with an easel on her back. When she saw Meg, who was clearing the table, she was stunned for a moment, and her eyes immediately lit up with joy. "Teacher and you're back. I left a few skewers for you. Wash your hands quickly and come over to eat." Meg looked at and said with a smile. And stepped in and patted Amy's head. Then, she put the easel against the wall and greeted Irina with sign language before quickly walking into the kitchen to wash her hands. After coming out, she wasn't in a hurry to eat. Instead, she looked at Meg and asked in sign language, "When did you come back?" "I just came back not long ago. Amy said that you went to class today, and she was in a hurry to eat the roasted meat, so she didn't wait for you. But we'll have dinner with the other sisters later," Meg said as he put the meat on the grill. And didn't ask any more questions. She just looked at Meg with a smile. She rested her chin on one hand and smiled brightly and innocently. Speaking of teachers, Meg remembered that he had already abandoned the children for a week. He had to go to class next Monday. Otherwise, he would have to spend time picking up the children when they were out of practice. Not long after, the girls all came over together. The dining room door opened, and Xiao Guai was the first to rush in. Her footsteps were a little shaky as she mumbled, "Father. Father." When she saw Meg standing in front of the table, she immediately rushed over and hugged his leg. Then, she climbed up like a koala bear. Meg lifted her up helplessly like he was carrying a kitten, and hugged her in his arms. The little girl was soft and had a nice smell on her. Mwah. Xiao Guai lay on Meg's face and gave him a big kiss. She held Meg's face with her two little hands and carefully examined it for a while. Then, she nodded and confirmed, "It's real, Father. How can it be fake?" Meg wanted to laugh in his heart. This little girl had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. "Boss, you're finally back. I missed you so much," Yabamiya said excitedly as she followed him in. "Boss." Gina looked at Meg with joy in her eyes, but she still resisted the urge to give Meg a cross-legged hug. "Wow! You guys are eating barbecued meat behind my back. That's too much." Barbara complained as her eyes were immediately attracted by the barbecued meat on the table when she entered. And picked up a barbecued beef kebab and handed it to her with a smile. Barbara immediately beamed with joy. She took the kebab and sat down beside Anne. "Baby Anne is the best. Big sister loves you." Phyllis was the last to enter with Yai in her arms. The little girl looked around with her bright eyes, and her gaze landed on Meg. She immediately squeaked and reached out her little hands to ask for a hug. "We don't know each other that well. Why are you so enthusiastic?" Meg helplessly took Yai from Phyllis's arms. The little girl sniffed his scent like a puppy, then closed her eyes and fell asleep instantly. Meg was speechless. "Am I a hypnotic bed?" "Boss looks like he sleeps well," Yabamiya said softly. Elizabeth's mouth twitched, but she held back her laughter. However, she looked at Meg and felt that the current Meg seemed a little different, but she couldn't tell what the difference was. "What are we eating tonight? Barbecued meat? Hot pot? Or stir-fried vegetables?" Meg asked everyone as he placed Yai on the stroller to sleep. "Actually, we've eaten hot pot and barbecued meat these few days. Raina and Phyllis have successfully mastered these two skills." "I want to eat braised pork," Yabamiya expressed her opinion. "I want to eat beggar's chicken," Gina said. "I want to eat grilled fish." "Then let's eat stir-fried vegetables." "I'll go and prepare. You guys take a rest." Meg nodded, and continued, "Oh, yes. I've brought you some presents on this trip. Open them and take a look." He took out a pile of gifts from his magic ring and distributed them to the girls. The girls opened the gifts happily, but Phyllis followed Meg into the kitchen. "Let me help you." Meg didn't refuse. Phyllis was an excellent cook. With her help, he could get twice the result with half the effort. The girls' surprised and puzzled voices came from outside. These were the gifts that Meg had brought back from the dungeon. He didn't purposely choose things that were too high-tech. They were more practical. "It's so cool and comfortable." Yabamiya wore an exquisite bracelet on her wrist. It was a thermostat bracelet that could ensure that her body temperature was maintained at a comfortable range. Mia was afraid of cold and heat. With this bracelet, she didn't have to worry about sweating even if she was busy at work. The others' gifts were also unique. They were all carefully selected by Meg. For example, Amy's gift was a super snack gift bag. It included 100 types of popular snacks in the dungeon, and they were all super large portions. Anne's gift was a drawing board. This wasn't an ordinary drawing board. It could shrink into the shape of a bracelet and expand into a large drawing board. It could be used to draw directly on the drawing board. The finished drawing could be stored in the drawing board. It was a magical tool for drawing outside. After dinner, the girls cleared the table and left. Meg repeated Journey to the West 3 times before he finally managed to coax the 3 children to sleep. After closing the door gently, Meg returned to the bedroom. The light in the room was dim and ambiguous. A graceful figure was lying on the bed, her slender legs faintly discernible through the gauze. Meg smiled. He took off his bathrobe, climbed onto the bed, and pulled the beauty into his arms. That night, the bed swayed. It was unknown when it would stop. Outside the window, the sky was starting to brighten. Meg touched the head of the bed instinctively, but felt nothing. He couldn't help but find it funny. Even though he had transmigrated for a year, he still had the habit of wanting a cigarette after sex. The person beside him was still panting. Tears were glistening in her watery eyes. She was satisfied and a little resentful. "What's the situation over there?" Irina's voice still had a hint of laziness and panting. "I made them sign a contract. They promised not to invade the Norland continent." Meg showed her the Twin Towers contract. Irina sat up and read the contents of the contract carefully. She was a little surprised. "They are actually willing to sign it. Didn't you say they have over 100 gods? After I became a god, I killed 10 of them and destroyed the most mysterious and powerful organization in the dungeon, the Immortals. They had no objections after that," Meg said matter-of-factly. Irina's mouth was slightly agape as she looked at Meg in disbelief. Those were gods. Gods that hadn't appeared in the Norland continent for 10,000 years. Meg actually killed 10 of them in one go. She didn't doubt Meg's words. She just felt that it was a little surreal. The fellow who invaded the elves previously was sent by the Immortals. They had a god-hunting plan. They wanted to capture the gods of the Norland continent, so I destroyed them all, Meg continued. Irina pursed her lips and jumped into Meg's arms. Meg hugged her gently and didn't say a word. The Elven Queen's death must have been a huge blow to her. It was just that she didn't like to show it in front of others. Meg hugged Irina for a long time, and felt that she was slowly calming down. He whispered in her ear, "I want to marry you. Let's hold a wedding and invite all our friends. I want to tell everyone formally and solemnly that you are my wife." Irina nodded. Meg nodded. "Ha!" Irina was stunned. The lights in the room lit up. Meg took out a crystal-clear blue diamond ring from somewhere. He got up from the bed and knelt on one knee. He looked at Irina affectionately. "Marry me." Irina's eyes reddened instantly. Tears flowed out of her eyes, but she couldn't suppress the smile on her face. She reached out her right hand. Meg put the ring on her finger. At that moment, Meg felt a sense of responsibility and fulfillment. Meg got up and hugged Irina tightly in his arms. The connection of their souls made him feel joy and happiness. "We will hold our wedding in 7 days. I will arrange everything." Meg put Irina down gently on the bed. "Sleep." Irina fell asleep sweetly with a smile on her face. Meg got up and took a shower. He changed into a new chef's suit and went downstairs to prepare for the day's business. The restaurant was closed for a week. The customers were bored out of their minds. It was unknown who leaked the news, but at the crack of dawn, there was already a long line outside the restaurant, which even extended into the park. Meg walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and took a look. He was amused and touched. The Burning Legion was the most eye-catching. Even under the dim shade, they were still the brightest. Phyllis also came to help early in the morning. Camilla went back to her hometown. According to Meg's original plan, today was still a holiday. But it made sense. Camilla was now the leader of the vampires. She held an important position. It was a waste of her talent to come to the restaurant every day as a chopper. Look, Connie had completely transformed into a strong female leader of the orcs. She was devoted to her career. She even had to go on a business trip to the restaurant. Meg's takeout business came to an end because the only takeout worker ran away. The restaurant reopened. The girls all arrived in advance to prepare for the opening. Considering the customers' vengeful spending, Meg prepared double the usual breakfast, including soup dumplings and youtiao. After the preparations were almost done, everyone ate breakfast first. "Where's the lady boss? Why didn't she come for breakfast this morning?" Mia asked, puzzled. "She slept late last night." "I don't think she's eating breakfast," Meg answered. "Why did she sleep late? Didn't we listen to a bedtime story together last night?" Gina asked innocently. "Boss hasn't been home for so many days. It would be weird if she slept early," Barbara said casually as she chewed on a youtiao. The atmosphere at the dining table suddenly became a little strange. You're the one who knows best." Meg glanced at Barbara. "I mean, I was too happy to sleep," Barbara explained with a blush. "Although I was very happy, I still slept very soundly," Amy mumbled as she continued chewing on her soup dumplings. Her little face was almost buried in the plate. What could a bunch of inexperienced girls know? Meg didn't want to explain. It would only make things worse. After breakfast, Meg pushed his bicycle out to send Amy to school. "Mr. Mac, you're finally back." "Mr. Mac, I've been queuing here since midnight." "Mr. Mac," familiar faces greeted Meg one after another with a hint of resentment in their voices. Meg greeted them familiarly before riding his bicycle away. The bicycle stopped at the entrance of Chaos School, and Meg greeted the old man guarding the gate. He held Amy's little hand and sent her to the magic classroom. "You." Crassus took the breakfast from Meg and looked at Meg in surprise. The Meg today gave him a completely different feeling. He had returned to his original state, and could no longer detect his aura. Crassus had some guesses in his heart, but he couldn't ask directly. "I've troubled you during this period of time. Amy's mother and I are planning to hold a wedding next Sunday. Please come." Meg handed him an invitation with a smile. "Wedding?" Crassus was a little surprised. He took the invitation and nodded with a smile. "All right, I'll definitely come." "Wedding? Is it the kind of wedding where many people eat together?" Amy's eyes lit up as she asked Meg in surprise. "Yes, it's my wedding with your mother." Meg nodded with a smile. He patted Amy's head and said, "Then I won't disturb your classes." After Meg left, Crassus took the breakfast to a table at the side and sat down. He ate a few mouthfuls of porridge, and flipped open the invitation curiously. It was an exquisite and beautiful invitation. The wedding date was written on it, and the venue was Amy's. However, he was a little surprised by the signature. "The groom, Meg; the bride, Irina. Does he know that I already know?" Crassus smiled. "That's right. Meg and Irina were smart people. It was just that everyone saw through it and didn't say anything." Meg returned to the restaurant and opened the door on time. He even made an exception to open the designated hot pot area in the morning so that more customers could enter the restaurant. Baskets of soup dumplings floated out from the kitchen and landed on the tables of the customers. The youtiao and soy milk set meal was also very popular. The stomach-warming and delicious century egg and lean meat porridge was the social animal's favorite. It was only halfway through the morning opening hours when the kitchen ran out of food. Meg still underestimated the revenge of the foodies. Meg purposely extended the opening hours by half an hour so that the customer at the end of the line could also have a hot breakfast. After the morning opening hours, the ladies went back to rest. Meg cooked a new pot of porridge and brought it upstairs for Irina. Irina was wearing loose pajamas as she sat cross-legged on the sofa and ate her porridge. She looked at Meg and asked, "The threat to the underground city has been removed. What do you plan to do with the great old ones?" "I will go out tomorrow. Now that I can sense their location, I will completely eliminate them from the Norland continent," Meg said with a smile. Completely eliminate them. But the gods could only seal them back then. Irina frowned slightly. "I found a way to restrain them." Meg opened his hand, and a silver longsword appeared in his hand. Irina looked at the two mysterious runes engraved on the sword hilt, and asked curiously, "This is?" "This is the Heaven's Questioning Sword. It's another opportunity one got in the underground city. It can be said to be the embodiment of the laws. It specializes in cutting down laws," Meg explained. This was also the reason why he could kill the transcendents in the underground city like they were dogs. "Then I will go with you." "It's okay. I will be back soon." Meg smiled and shook his head. He stroked her soft long hair gently and sat down beside her. "Why don't we consider having a second child?" Irina's hand paused. She turned to look at him with a sly gaze. "Are you sure you can bring it over?" "I'm a professional stay-at-home dad." Meg patted his chest confidently. Mamie's reopened and revitalized the business in this corner of the Aden Square. After giving Irina a booster shot, Meg went out to deliver a few invitations. It was time to prepare for the lunch service. Meg didn't plan to make this wedding a big deal. He planned to take the small and beautiful route. He invited friends from both sides. There were about 30 to 40 people. Meg signed the invitations to his old friends, Alex. He signed the invitations to his new friends, Meg. He wanted his old friends to know that he had married Irina. He also wanted his friends from the restaurant to know that Mr. Mac had married the lady boss. "He's getting married. It's a pity that the bride isn't me." Gloria stood in front of the Suede restaurant. She looked a little lonely as she looked at the exquisite invitation in her hand. Behind her, the wooden mannequin was wearing a white gauze dress. It was her size. Luna took the invitation from Meg's hand. There was a hint of surprise in her smile. "Congratulations. I'll be there for the wedding." Watching Meg's bicycle drive away, Luna opened the invitation. It was an exquisite hand-drawn silhouette of the two of them leaning against each other. It looked so beautiful. "That's great. This way, Amy won't have to worry about her mother's absence at the parent-teacher conference." Luna smiled. She put away the invitation and walked toward the school. "But why do I envy her?" Sargeras gathered the core members of the Burning Legion, and asked very seriously, "Mr. Mac is getting married. He invited me to the wedding. What gift do you think I should give to make it seem more attentive and special?" "I think you can give him a big piece of gold in the shape of a heart," Mon suggested. "That's so tacky. You're just making Boss embarrass himself." Keel shook his head. After some serious thought, he said, "I think a heart-shaped gem would be better." The invitations were sent to Dragon Island, the Wind Forest, Twilight Forest, Rodu, and the Demon Islands on the fastest lightning falcon. They were all sent to their old friends. Meanwhile, in Chaos City, the news of Mr. Mac's upcoming wedding spread like wildfire. The dreams of 900 million young girls were shattered overnight. This is simply a romantic epic. Vicky looked at the invitation in her hand excitedly. She had already heard from She what Meg did after entering the underground city, including how he killed the Undying and sealed the entrance of the underground city to the Norland continent. Although she had a pen in her hand, she didn't dare to make up such a story. The underground city that gave birth to her had become a backdrop, but that didn't affect her admiration for Meg's lone hero at all. He was already the most powerful person in both worlds, a true god standing at the top of the world. The first thing he did was to marry Irina, the woman who gave birth to Amy, for him and gave him everything. He still ran his little restaurant and welcomed every customer with a smile, just like how he did in the beginning. Vicky felt that her pen was about to move on its own. Angela, who had successfully gotten a speaking role, also received the invitation. She stared at the invitation for a long time in silence. She still didn't understand. How am I inferior to him? I can be sweet, salty, soft, and tame. I can wear black stockings and fishnet stockings, but he has never looked me in the eye. How romantic. He actually wants to hold a wedding. As expected of boss. Connie looked at the invitation more than 10 times with a silly smile on her face. Master, I'm going to attend boss's wedding. I'll leave the clan's affairs to you. Bye-bye. Connie put away the invitation and immediately packed her things to leave. Isn't the wedding 7 days later? Why are you leaving so early? Rex walked in from outside the tent and asked in confusion. I'm worried that something might happen on the way. I need to leave some time for contingency. Connie said a little embarrassedly. Lex sighed in her heart. She knew herself very well. I'll go with you, Rex said. No need. I'm just going to attend the wedding. Connie had already run out of the tent. Her voice came from outside. I'll ride the fastest and smartest lightning griffin. That guy has been ridden by you too much recently. It's not very smart anymore. Rex complained but didn't say anything else. After a day of normal business, Amy's took a day off the next day with the excuse that boss was preparing for the wedding. This reason was understood by the customers for the time being. Meg rode the warship that she had gifted on behalf of Ferdinand and headed straight for the extreme north. There were still a few level 10 powerhouses guarding the battlefield ruins in the extreme north where half of Cthulhu was sealed. Meg put on his mask and descended from the sky. The alarm was triggered. 2 figures rushed out immediately, and a few teams of guards surrounded them. I'm Alex. I'm here today to kill the devil in the seal. Meg revealed his identity. The level 10 powerhouses confirmed Meg's identity, but they were very confused about his purpose in coming here. Master Alex, this devil can't be killed. You were the one who sealed it. How are you going to kill it today? A demon powerhouse asked in confusion. The other level 10 powerhouses were also puzzled. They even had some doubts about Meg. Because I'm different today. Meg stretched out his hand. The Heaven's Inquisition sword appeared in his palm, and a vast aura was released. The level 10 powerhouses' expressions changed drastically. They retreated a few hundred meters instinctively and looked at Meg, who was standing under the seal, in disbelief. Such a vast aura was like that of a god. It actually made them want to kneel down and worship him. This was completely different from the Alex who was fighting with the devil on this battlefield that day. He's become a god. The Elder Elven powerhouse exclaimed in shock. Meg didn't explain much to them. He took a step forward, and stepped into the seal. Crassus's gelatinous body covered in black scales was still huge. Its giant bat wings were retracted. It seemed to have sensed Meg's arrival, and let out a sharp and ear-piercing mocking laugh. Puny human, you will die eventually, but I will never perish. When this spell formation decays, it will be the time I return to the Norland continent. Your useless body is indeed not as useful as your brain. After all, you've supplied the entire city with octopus tentacles. This kind of output and contribution is totally worth awarding you a little gold medal as a supplier. Meg looked at that squirming Cthulhu coldly. Arrange it right away, the system answered. Puny. Before Crassus could finish, a white rainbow had already slashed out from Meg's hand, and pierced through Cthulhu's body countless times in an instant. Beams of light shot out from Cthulhu's body that had been stabbed. The flying sword returned to its sheath, and landed in Meg's hand. Crassus's huge body exploded, and completely turned into nothingness. I'm very big. You can't bear it. Meg kept his sword, and left the seal without looking back. On this day, Cthulhu died, and the seal on the Arctic plains of the far north was lifted. The guard stationed in this bitter cold land could return home. It was also on this day that Meg walked through the mountains and rivers of the Norland continent, and killed 15 great old ones. Only half of Cthulhu was left outside Chaos City. The news of Alex becoming a god spread across the Norland continent. Sean rushed to the palace, but this impregnable palace didn't give him much sense of security. When night fell, Meg, who had been on the move for a day, arrived outside the palace in the center of Rodu. The next morning, the Roth Empire announced to the world, King Andre and Crown Prince Sean suddenly contracted a serious illness, and passed away one after another. The third prince, Yuri Edward, was crowned king. Because he was still young, Princess Vanessa assisted him in ruling the country. The world was shocked. Are you sure you want this wedding dress? Or do you want to try another one? Meg held 2 wedding dresses in his hands. Irina looked at the wedding dresses in Meg's hands with a conflicted expression. One had a fresh style of tulle, and the other had a gorgeous style with a long hemline. She liked both. What should she do? Meg could tell that Irina was conflicted. He smiled and said, "Why don't we keep both and wear them during the wedding? I think it's pretty good." Irina nodded. The wedding date was approaching quickly. Meg planned to prepare an exquisite and beautiful wedding for Irina, hoping to leave her with a beautiful memory. During this period, Meg didn't slack off at all. What he spent the most effort on was the Manchuhan Imperial Feast with 108 dishes in his mind. Back then, Meg promised Amy that he would cook a Manchuhan Imperial Feast for her in the future. Naturally, he couldn't go back on his word. However, the amount of work required to cook these 108 dishes was really shocking. Luckily, after breaking through to the godly realm, his comprehension and control had reached the extreme. He had already mastered it in a few days. Amy ran over and curiously asked, "Father, little Guy and I only need to hold Floey tomorrow." "Floey? Where is Floey?" Little Guy, who was sitting on the ground playing with building blocks, looked up and around before lowering his head to continue stacking building blocks. "Yes, you only need to hold Floey and walk in front of us tomorrow. Then, you can go and eat." Meg nodded with a smile and patted Amy's head. "Also, Father will cook a Manchuhan Imperial Feast for you tomorrow." Manchuhan Imperial Feast. Is that the Manchuhan Imperial Feast that has 108 dishes and can be eaten for 3 days in a row? Amy's eyes lit up as if there was a glimmer of light in them. "You still remember?" Meg couldn't help but laugh. Sure enough, the thing that a foodie couldn't forget the most was delicious food. "Of course, this is the first time Father promised to cook delicious food for me." Amy nodded her little head matter-of-factly. "Well, we'll have lunch together tomorrow at noon. Then, our family will eat different dishes for 3 days in a row." Meg nodded with a smile. Of course, it was impossible to serve all 108 dishes to the guests who came to attend the wedding, so he planned to select 36 dishes for tomorrow's banquet. Okay. The little one nodded and smiled from ear to ear. On the eve of the wedding, according to the elf tribe's rules, Irina didn't stay in the restaurant. Instead, she went to the factory in the north of the city. Meg coaxed the 3 children to sleep early. He lay on the bed and tossed and turned, but he was so excited that he couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. He had lived 2 lives, but this was the first time he was a groom at a wedding. After a sleepless night, Meg got up early the next morning and went downstairs. However, unlike the usual groom who was in a hurry to get ready to go out to pick up his wife, Meg went downstairs to prepare for lunch. For this wedding, he wanted to leave a beautiful memory for Irina, and he also wanted to leave a deep impression on all the guests present. The 36 dishes included phoenix-tailed shark's fin, red plum pearls, mountain chicken, luohan prawns, braised fish lips, braised fish bones, scallion shark skin, and so on. The system had already prepared all kinds of ingredients for Meg in advance, but there was still a lot of work to be done in advance for 5 tables of guests. Fortunately, Meg was no longer the person he used to be. Now, he was charging money. The ingredients flew out of the fridge one by one and were washed according to different requirements. Then, the fat-head fish danced in the air, and all kinds of ingredients that were cut up fell like rain onto the prepared plates. In less than half an hour, all the ingredients that needed to be prepared in advance were prepared. The stew was placed in the pot and simmered over a small fire. Only then did Meg go upstairs to take a shower and change his clothes. He wore a well-ironed black suit, combed his hair back, and even shaved off his mustache reluctantly. He looked handsome and dashing. The 3 children also got up and changed their clothes with Gina's help. They looked very cute in their pink dresses. Wow, father is so handsome. Amy ran downstairs with a smitten look on her face. Gina looked at Meg, and her eyes also lit up. She couldn't help but blush a little. Her boss looked even more handsome today. All right, we should go and pick up the bride now. Meg smiled as he carried Amy and walked towards the door. There were already many people crowding outside the restaurant. The news that Meg was getting married had spread all over Chaos City these few days. As the murderer who shattered the dreams of 900 million young girls, many of them still couldn't help but come to watch the ceremony. The city lord's castle specially sent the law enforcement team to maintain order for today's wedding, and there was also a ceremonial team to assist in the wedding. Furthermore, the city lord would even come personally to preside over the wedding. This was a first in Chaos City. The crowd cheered and screamed when Meg opened the door. Heavens, he's so handsome. What do you mean by not being the bride? I hate it. May I know if you're considering marrying your second aunt? Mag, who was in a suit, made all the ladies fall for him the moment he stepped out. There was a red convertible classic car parked in front of the door. The bright red color shone especially brightly under the sun. This was custom-made by Meg from the system. The city lord's castle had arranged a horse-drawn carriage for them, but Meg rejected it. That wasn't cool enough. Of course, his initial plan was to take Oz to pick up the bride, and circle Chaos City 3 times. That would definitely be cool enough. However, this plan was too exaggerated, and would expose his identity too much. Hence, it was rejected in the end. The convertible sports car was low-profile and luxurious. The train was already running on the tracks, and had started its initial test run. This 4-wheeled car sped on the road. Although it was eye-catching, it wasn't that exaggerated. Meg boarded the car and sat in the driver's seat. The 3 children sat in the back, and then protected little Guai. Boss, go ahead. Leave the restaurant to us, Yabamiya encouraged as she stood beside the car with her fists clenched. The ladies from the restaurant were all here. Elizabeth, Shirley, Anna, Jane, Barbara, Raina, and Angela were all here. Oh, Camilla wasn't here. Meg didn't care too much. He nodded at the ladies, started the car, and set off to pick up the bride. He drove straight to the north of the city, and stopped outside the textile factory. Elves liked simplicity and elegance, so the textile factory didn't have any red decorations. There was only a rainbow carpet that extended all the way to the entrance. Today was the wedding of the princess, and the whole factory was closed. The atmosphere was just as festive. The citizens only knew that Mr. Mac's bride was an elf, so it seemed very reasonable for Mr. Mac to pick up the bride at the textile factory where the elves gathered. They didn't think too much about it. Meg alighted, and stood in front of the car as he looked in the direction of the entrance with anticipation. Music started to play. It was the traditional ocarina of the elves. Accompanied by Ashley and Phyllis on her left and right, Irina walked down the colorful red carpet. Her gorgeous white wedding gown made her look even more holy and pure, and she wore a small golden crown on her head, making her look noble and elegant. Meg looked at her, and felt that he couldn't find another person as beautiful and adorable as her in this world. He couldn't help but smile. Irina also looked at him. Although her expression was solemn, her eyes were full of smiles. He actually shaved his beard, and he looked quite good. He looked like a younger brother. The newlyweds were exchanging affectionate glances with each other. Phyllis was still in a daze. It wasn't until this morning that she realized that the princess was the lady boss, and Amy was the little mistress she had been longing for, while she was just a clown. Mother is so beautiful. Amy clasped her little hands, her eyes sparkling. Beautiful, beautiful, Auntie. Little Guy also stuck his little head out and tried his best to look at the bride walking down the rainbow carpet. And had taken out a drawing board at some point and enlarged it to only 16K in size. She drew on the screen, and the image of Irina walking down the rainbow carpet was already vivid on the paper. I'm here to pick you up. Meg smiled as he opened the door to the front passenger seat. Irina only looked at him affectionately before sitting sideways in the front passenger seat. Meg got into the car and nodded slightly at Phyllis and Ashley. Thank you for your hard work. Welcome to our wedding. Ashley smiled and nodded, feeling gratified as an elder. Phyllis nodded blankly, still a little dazed from the blow. Meg drove a car, and the three children came to pick up the bride. However, the wedding procession was exceptionally luxurious. 500 elves rode unicorns and carried all kinds of dowry items to send off the princess. A red convertible opened the way, and 500 handsome elves rode on beautiful unicorns to send off the bride. Such a marvelous scene attracted passers-by to stop and watch. And when people saw the couple in the car, they spontaneously sent their blessings. With the help of the city lord's mansion's people, the wedding procession successfully arrived at Mamie's. The red carpet had already been laid all the way from the entrance of the restaurant to the park. The lawn in the corner of the park had been meticulously decorated, and a flower path led directly to a small platform in the center. There were dozens of chairs on both sides, and the guests had already taken their seats. People were shocked to discover that each of these guests' identities was more and more explosive than the previous one. City Lord Michael presided over the wedding. Buffett Bank's Miss Hill came. Chaos School's Principal Novan came. Grey Temple's Lord Roland came. Lord of Fire Crassus came. Vampire Chief Camilla came. Lord of Ice Julian came. God of Forging Master Rome came. Vampire Ancestor Dracula came. Not only that. Isn't that young and noble elf sitting in the corner Her Majesty, the Elven Queen Sally? Could that tall and big man be the Frost Dragon's demigod powerhouse, Rankster? Mr. Mac's circle of friends is simply shocking. It's more than shocking. It's simply shocking my mother. The onlookers were completely shocked by the lineup of guests. The wedding car stopped, and Meg held Irina's hand as they got out of the car. The guests all turned to look, and most of them had smiles on their faces. Michael stood on the platform and prepared to preside over the wedding. Wait a minute. Right at this moment, an exclamation suddenly came from the sky. A grayish-black griffin conch spiraled down from the sky and crashed toward the wedding venue. Novin raised his right hand, and a soft space cushion appeared above him. He caught the griffin that was falling from the sky, and gently placed it on the ground at the side. A thin and small figure kicked the griffin away, and came out. She looked at the people who were looking at her strangely, and smiled awkwardly. Sorry, I'm a little late. The person who came was Connie, who had set off a week ago. Isn't that the new chief of the orcs, Miss Connie? She's here too. But, it seems like she met with some trouble on the way. Soon, some people recognized Connie, and started discussing. Connie covered her face, and quickly ran to sit beside Barbara, pretending that nothing had happened. Now, everyone was here. The elven band played traditional music, and Amy and little Guy walked in front with flowers in their hands. Irina held onto Meg's arm, and stepped onto the floral path together. Michael used the ancient wedding speech of the Norland continent to give the newlyweds his sincere blessings. Meg held Irina's hand and walked up the platform. The two of them stood facing each other, and looked at each other. Let's invite our groom to say a few words to the bride. Michael stepped down from the platform with a smile. Presiding over a god's wedding was something that he could brag about for the rest of his life. The venue became quiet all of a sudden, and everyone looked at the two of them on the platform. The ladies' eyes were shining with anticipation. A wedding like this was probably what every woman yearned for, right? Meg looked at Irina, and felt his heart beating faster. Even when he was facing the great old one, he wasn't as nervous as he was now. His voice was a little hoarse because of nervousness, but he still said in a magnetic voice, "Life and death contract, we'll make a promise. Holding your hand, we'll grow old together. I'll keep this promise." Irina smiled. She smiled so happily that tears glistened in her eyes. She suddenly understood why she persevered for 3 years. It was so that their family could be reunited again. It was so that she could stand here and marry him at this moment. Meg pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. Thunderous applause rang out at the scene, mixed with a few sighs of sorrow. The wedding ceremony ended in the fragrance of lemons. It was trendy and moving. It would definitely lead to a new trend of weddings in Chaos City. Meg held Irina's hand and returned to the dining room. The second floor was the bridal chamber that had been decorated. The guests also went to the dining room to wait for the banquet to begin. Given the status of the guests, eating at a wedding had always been the least important part of the event. However, this was Meg's wedding, so it was a little different because he would cook personally. If he didn't cook personally, I might not have come today, Dracula said to Camilla, who was sitting beside him. Useless, Camilla complained, but she was a little absent-minded. Amy was holding a small bowl and had already found a seat for herself. And and Xiao Guai were sitting next to her. They did not have much fighting spirit, and Ugly Duckling was squatting by her feet, wondering if it could eat meat today. Everyone sat down and chatted. Many of them knew each other, so it was not boring. The Hill and Gloria sat together. Luna and Sally were also at this table. Vicky and she were also at this table. Why do I feel that the atmosphere at this table is a little strange? Could it be a breakup alliance? Vicky whispered to she through telepathy. Mr. Mac is too bold, isn't he? She gave a perfunctory and fiddled with her bracelet. Vicky took a serious look at she. She doesn't seem normal either. Amid everyone's anticipation, the dishes finally started to be served from the kitchen. Shark's fin with phoenix tail, red plum beads, Guanlu mountain chicken, Luohan prawns. There was a dazzling array of colors and smells, and even the well-informed guests could not help but exclaim, "Thank goodness I made it in time. Otherwise, I would have missed this exceptional feast." Connie, who took the opportunity to change her clothes and wash her face, muttered softly. She chewed on a prawn and beamed with joy. "We've been eating for 3 days in a row. This is so blissful." If only father and mother get married every day. The Manchu Han Imperial Feast is so delicious. Amy held a prawn in one hand and a chicken leg in the other. She sucked on shark's fin with her mouth and could not hide the blissful smile on her face. Irina changed her gorgeous wedding dress into a fresh one and sat down to eat. "Lady Boss, you're the woman I envy the most. Really, no one else can compare. This is also the best wedding I've ever attended," Vivian said with a sincere look on her face. This time, Mr. Mack was really taken and she lost a permanent freeloading opportunity. It was all Luna's fault for not living up to her expectations. Meg held Irina's hand and had a drink with the guests. The wedding banquet ended and the guests left one after another. The ladies cleaned up the restaurant and took the initiative to leave. They took the children with them and left plenty of space for the 2 newlyweds. On the balcony on the 3rd floor, Irina was still in her wedding dress and sitting on the swing. She smiled and looked back at Meg, who was pushing the swing for her. "I really liked this wedding." Meg also looked at her with a smile. "I liked it too." You. End of book. It's over. After a day and a night of writing, the grand finale of 15,000 yuan, there were so many things she wanted to say, but now she just wanted to go out for a walk and calm down. She would write the closing speech in 2 days. End of chapter. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.